Chapter 35-44. Inside the Fortune Divine Palace. 6 hours had passed. In another 2 hours, the baptism ceremony would begin. Then, more than 100 elites and geniuses would enter the Fortune Divine Palace. Ji Tianxing was still focused on deciphering the divine arrays. He was so focused that he almost forgot about everything else. In a short period of time, his concentration and energy were rapidly depleting, causing his face to turn pale and his forehead to be covered in sweat. Although he had successfully bypassed 2 divine arrays, he had only deciphered 1 supreme-grade divine array. However, this was already the fastest he could go. He was trying his best to decipher the 2nd divine array. Both of his hands were forming divine seals, sending out dazzling divine lights, forming complex seals, and injecting them into the fortune altar. The speed at which his hands were casting spells was too fast, dazzling everyone's eyes, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Even so, he still needed more than an hour to decipher the 2nd divine array. No matter how he looked at it, he would not be able to decipher the 3rd divine array before the baptism ceremony began, and he would not be able to obtain the fortune divine bead. Thinking of this, Huang Xiaolong was incomparably anxious. He calculated silently. 6 hours have passed, but the high priest still hasn't returned. Looks like my plan succeeded. The calm peace divine king and Jun Mubai have successfully delayed the high priest. But no matter how much time they delay, the high priest will definitely return before the baptism ceremony begins. Could it be that I'm just going to look at the fortune divine bead like this and miss out on it? No, absolutely not. Even if I have to use force to kill the high priest, I must obtain this fortune divine bead. It is Yao Yao's only hope of breaking through to the God King realm. Ji Tianxing's determination was firm, and his attitude was resolute. Soon, another hour had passed. The high priest still had not returned, and Ji Tianxing was the only one around the fortune altar. He had finally deciphered the 2nd supreme grade king grade divine array. Now, there was only 1 divine array between him and the fortune divine bead, but he would need at least 3 hours to decipher that divine array. Damn it, there's not enough time. The baptism ceremony would begin in another hour, and there would be countless experts guarding the Fortune Divine Palace. Outside the Divine Palace, there were at least 100,000 gods watching the ceremony. Close to 100 elites and geniuses would be gathered here after receiving their identity badges. Don't tell me that I have to forcefully break the last divine formation in front of the high priest and nearly 100 people? Ji Tianxing frowned. His heart was burning with worry, but there was nothing he could do. At this moment, he really regretted not taking action earlier. If he had entered the Fortune Divine Palace 4 hours earlier, he would have obtained the Fortune Divine Bead by now. Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret in this world, and time could not be reversed. Forget it. No matter what the result is, let's just give it a try. There will be a way when the car comes to the mountain, and the boat will cross the bridge when it comes to it. With that in mind, Ji Tianxing continued to cast spells to break the last divine array. However, at this moment, Yun Yao's voice suddenly rang in his mind. Tianxing, do you need my help? Ji Tianxing was stunned for a moment. Then he replied via divine sense, I've already checked. The Fortune Divine Bead is inside the sacrificial altar. However, this sacrificial altar has 5 top grade king grade divine formations. I've already bypassed 2 of them, so I need to break the remaining 3. Now, I've already broken 2 divine formations, and there's only 1 left. Unfortunately, there's not enough time left. There's less than an hour left. He briefly explained the current situation to Yun Yao. After listening to his explanation, Yun Yao immediately asked him to open the 9 heavens 10 absolutes pagoda. Swoosh! A white light flashed, and Yun Yao appeared above the Fortune Divine altar. She looked at the splendid sacrificial altar beneath her feet, and her eyes shone brightly. She nodded repeatedly and said, That's right, it's really the Fortune Divine Bead. It's in the depths of the sacrificial altar. Tianxing, the Fortune Divine Bead, is so close to me, and I can sense and resonate strongly with it. I can feel that it's sentient. It's complaining and whining to me. It wants to struggle and break free from the sacrificial altar shackles. Hearing her words, Ji Tianxing's eyes shone brightly. He said in surprise, "This fortune divine bead actually has sentience and emotions? It seems like it's the most mysterious and the most powerful among the 7 divine beads." Yin Yao didn't reply. She remained silent and focused on sensing the fortune divine bead. After a while, she suddenly raised her head and looked at Ji Tianxing. Her eyes sparkled, and she asked in a serious tone, "Tianxing, you said that there's still an hour left, and you won't be able to break the last divine formation in time? If I control the fortune divine bead and let it attack the divine formation with all its might, working with you from the inside, are you confident that you can break it within an hour?" "What?" Ji Tianxing was even more surprised. He asked in disbelief, "You can control the fortune divine bead? That's unbelievable. It's a top-grade king-grade divine object. Theoretically, it's the same grade as that divine formation. But in reality, it's even more powerful than that divine formation. If it attacks the divine formation from the inside, I'm confident that I can break it within an hour." Yin Yao didn't hesitate. She nodded decisively and said, "All right, then let's not delay any longer. Let's start now." Ji Tianxing didn't hesitate anymore. He quickly focused his mind and focused on breaking the divine formation with all his might. Inside the divine formation, the dazzling fortune divine bead was already connected to Yin Yao's mind. Under the control of Yin Yao's mind, it was no longer silent. It became abnormally active. It released a vast and mighty divine power that charged left and right inside the divine formation. It fiercely attacked the nodes and foundation of the divine formation. Previously, the reason why Ji Tianxing couldn't break the divine formation fast was mainly because the internal structure of the divine formation was complicated. Moreover, his divine power wasn't strong enough. He often needed to spend several times more time to break a certain formation. But now, Yin Yao was controlling the fortune divine bead to cooperate with him. This was the speed at which he broke the divine formation. It was several times faster and easier. The originally complicated divine formation was broken by him like a hot knife through butter. He advanced triumphantly all the way. As time passed, more and more of the formation's veins were destroyed by Ji Tianxing. The power of the divine formation kept weakening. It flickered with 5-colored divine light, and its divine power fluctuated violently. It seemed that Ji Tianxing only needed to break 4 more nodes before he would be able to break through the divine formation and create an opening. However, there were only a few minutes left before the baptism ceremony began. Swoosh! In the gloomy hall, a white light suddenly lit up, and a figure appeared. It was a white-haired old man. He was in a hurry. His face was gloomy, and his whole body was filled with terrifying anger. He was the high priest who had hurried back. As soon as he returned to the divine palace, he saw Ji Tianxing at the top of the creation altar and Yin Yao beside him. The high priest was startled. He immediately shouted angrily, "Yuan Ji, you bastard, what are you doing? And the woman beside you, who is she? Who let her in?" Chapter 35:45. *T. I'm still a little late. This old man came back just in time. The sudden appearance of the high priest made Ji Tianxing realize that something was wrong. However, the divine array was about to be broken. He couldn't give up halfway. Therefore, he pretended not to hear the high priest shout and sped up to break the last 4 nodes of the array. Yin Yao was also focused. She controlled the creation divine pearl and attacked the 4 nodes with all her might. Being ignored, the high priest became angrier and angrier. He flew to the creation altar angrily and shouted, "Yuan Ji, what the hell are you doing? Ying is safe and sound, and you have nothing to do with her. Why did you lie to me, saying that she was poisoned and that you have deep feelings for her? What do you want to do by sending me away for a few hours? Do you know that you have committed a serious crime? Even your father can't save you." The high priest frowned and stared at Ji Tianxing and Yin Yao as he shouted angrily. Seeing that the two of them were focused and pale, and were using some kind of secret technique, the high priest felt that something was wrong. He carefully examined the creation altar and found that the five-color divine light on the altar had become very weak. However, the creation divine power inside the altar was abnormally active and violent, like a volcano erupting. The high priest seemed to have guessed something, and his eyes widened in disbelief. He glared at Ji Tianxing and roared angrily. "Yuan-Ji, you rebellious maniac, how dare you? How dare you destroy the creation altar and steal the supreme divine pearl? Are you crazy? That is the altar built by the god emperor himself. You will bring disaster to your family by doing this." At this moment, the high priest was completely stunned by Ji Tianxing's craziness. No matter how shrewd and wise he couldn't figure out why Yuan-Ji would do this. He was simply blinded by greed. He ignored the dignity of the god emperor and paid with the lives of Feng Ling's entire family. The enraged high priest was about to make a move to stop Ji Tianxing from casting the spell. As Ji Tianxing cast a spell to break the last two nodes, he said to the high priestess, "High priestess, don't worry. I'm not crazy. I'll explain it to you later." "Explain my ass." The high priest roared angrily. He immediately raised his hand and was about to stop Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing had no choice but to take the risk. He shouted angrily, "Stop! Do you know who I am? Do you know what I'm doing? This king carries a shocking secret and shoulders the mission of His Majesty, the God Emperor. Don't make a mistake." The high priestess was stunned by his roar. His raised palm also froze in midair. He looked at Yuan-Ji in shock. He frowned and asked subconsciously, "What do you mean? Are you not Yuan-Ji? You're clearly trying to destroy the creation altar and seize the supreme divine pearl. How could this be the mission given to you by His Majesty, the God Emperor?" Little B Asterisk starred. "What the hell are you doing?" The high priest didn't believe Yuan-Ji's nonsense. However, his rationality told him that with Yuan-Ji's status, as long as he wasn't crazy, he definitely wouldn't do such a thing. Could it be that there were really some secrets and twists? For a moment, the high priest couldn't make up his mind. He had no choice. It was the first time he had encountered such a thing. Moreover, this matter was too abnormal and illogical. Ji Tianxing's roar was full of righteousness, and his tone was full of dignity. The high priest was confused on the spot. He couldn't tell the truth at all. While he was in a daze, Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao sped up and finally broke the last two nodes of the array. Suddenly, a gap appeared in the third divine array. Endless divine power of creation burst out from the gap like a volcanic eruption. Swoosh! In an instant, an overwhelming seven-color divine light filled the entire hall and lit up an area of 1,000 feet. The translucent creation divine bead was like a tired bird returning to its nest. It passed through the gap in the divine formation and flew towards Yun Yao at lightning speed. Swish! The divine pearl flew in front of her, and without stopping, it drilled into her glabella and disappeared. Yun Yao's expression changed immediately. Her eyes were filled with joy. She turned to Ji Tianxing and gave him a look. The two of them had a tacit understanding. Ji Tianxing immediately understood what she meant. Now that she had the creation divine pearl, her shackles were instantly loosened. She could break through to the divine king realm immediately. Therefore, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a beam of white light, putting Yun Yao into the Juqian 10 Absolute's pagoda. Yun Yao returned to the distorted space and immediately went into seclusion to break through without delay. At this moment, Ji Tianxing stopped and turned around to look at the Grand Priest. "All right, time's up. The mission is over." He dusted his sleeves and said with a smile. The high priest glared at Huang Xiaolong and pointed a finger at Huang Xiaolong as he bellowed, You traitor! You really let that woman take away the fortune divine bead. Don't deny it. You were trying to destroy the creation altar to steal the creation divine pearl." Ji Tianxing didn't deny it. He nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, you're right. That's true. However, this altar is sealed by 5 Supreme King grade divine arrays. How could I destroy it with my first realm of the King God realm cultivation base?" The Grand Priest was stunned. He frowned and mumbled, "That's right. The altar is protected by 5 supreme divine arrays. Only I know how to open them. It's because of this that I wasn't worried at all when I left by myself and left him here." But how'd he do it? While the Grand Priest was frowning and pondering, Ji Tianxing secretly cast a spell and shot out a few rays of divine light. Instantly, a blazing white space gate appeared in front of him. He stepped into the space gate and was about to leave the palace. However, before he left, he turned around to look at the Grand Priest and sneered, "I'm Yuan Ji. Everyone knows that I'm a good-for-nothing. I definitely don't have the strength to destroy the creation altar. Only you, the Grand Priest, know the creation altar best. You can destroy it and steal the creation divine pearl. You're the one who stole the creation altar. The baptism ceremony is about to end. You'd better think about how to explain it to everyone." After that, Ji Tianxing stepped into the space gate and disappeared. The high priest was stunned on the spot. He stared at the space gate with his mouth agape and cried out, "This is impossible. I've only used the secret technique to leave the palace once in front of him. How is it possible for him to learn it completely and execute it successfully?" After the shock, he remembered what Ji Tianxing had said. He was so angry that his face turned pale. "You can't destroy the altar. I stole the creation altar? Yuan Ji, you shameless bastard, you bastard. You and I can't exist under the same sky." The high priest finally understood that this whole thing had been a conspiracy from beginning to end. Yuan Ji was cunning and cunning. He had schemed against him too ruthlessly. Chapter 35:46. When the high priest regained his senses, he finally realized the seriousness of the matter. At the same time, he had great doubts about Yuan Ji's identity. That bastard kid, is he really Yuan Ji? How could an ignorant and incompetent good-for-nothing be so scheming and scheming? And his strength, he just broke through to the God King realm. How could he destroy the creation altar and break the supreme Grade King Grey Divine Array? Not to mention that no one would believe the news. Even the high priest himself didn't believe it. Because of this, he was even more flustered. He couldn't take the blame for this. The moment Ji Tianxing left the creation divine palace, the high priest executed a space technique and chased after him without hesitation. Swoosh! With a flash of white light, the high priest appeared in the brightly lit main hall. This fortune divine palace located in the middle of the Emperor Palace was, in fact, a fake. It was merely a decoy. The real creation divine palace that he and Ji Tianxing were in was actually tens of thousands of miles underground. At this time, the baptism ceremony had just ended. The high priest could clearly hear the clamor outside the creation divine palace. He looked around for Yuan Ji, but he couldn't find him. Just as he was about to step out of the creation divine palace, he saw hundreds of elites and geniuses walking towards him with joy and anticipation. Cheng Ju, the commander of the Imperial Guards, and dozens of other Imperial Guards stood majestically at the entrance. Everyone's faces were brimming with joy and anticipation. The air was filled with a cheerful atmosphere. But when the high priest saw this scene, his vision turned black, and he almost fainted. "It's over. This matter can't be hidden anymore." The high priest knew that no matter what the reason was, he would be severely punished by the God Emperor for leaving his post without permission and causing the supreme divine bead to be stolen. Moreover, if he didn't take the appropriate measures in time, the crime of stealing the supreme divine bead would fall on him. High priest, the creation altar is about to open. Why did you come out?" Just as the high priest's heart was in a mess, Cheng Ju's voice sounded in his ears. He raised his head and saw Cheng Ju looking at him with a puzzled expression. This old man. The high priest's face turned ugly. He wanted to say something, but hesitated. Cheng Ju instantly frowned when he saw his reaction, and he asked via voice transmission, "High priest, don't tell me that there's a problem with the creation altar? You have never left your post before, but you were absent for 8 hours last night. We're all colleagues, so I can pretend that I don't know. However, once something happens to the creation altar, no one will be able to hide it." Hearing Cheng Ju's words, the high priest immediately gritted his teeth and made up his mind. He looked at Chengju with a solemn expression and transmitted his voice in a grave tone. Commander Cheng, something big has happened. The fortune altar was destroyed, and the fortune divine pearl was stolen. Ah! Chengju was stunned on the spot. After a while, she recovered and said with a chuckle, High Priest, this joke is not funny at all. The High Priest's expression was very dark. His tone was even more solemn as he said, Commander Cheng, this old man is not joking. It was absolutely true. It was that bastard UNG. Last night, he entered the Fortune Divine Palace early and made up a series of lies, tricking this old man into leaving for a few hours. When this old man rushed back, he had already destroyed the altar and stolen the Fortune Divine Pearl. Seeing how serious the High Priest was, Chengju realized that something big had happened. His expression turned ugly as he asked in a low voice, UNG? No wonder he tried so hard to enter the Fortune Divine Pearl several hours in advance. It turns out that he had the intention to steal the Fortune Divine Pearl. This treacherous bastard is really audacious. After a pause, Chengju frowned and asked again, But High Priest, this is completely illogical. UNG has just broken through to the God King realm, and he is a well-known hedonistic young master. The creation altar is a supreme king-grade divine array laid down by the God Emperor. How could UNG break it with his strength? Moreover, to break 5 supreme grade divine arrays in 8 hours? This is ridiculous. Chengju believed that the Fortune Divine Pearl was stolen, but she didn't believe that it was UNG's doing. The High Priest's expression turned ugly as he asked angrily, Chengju, what do you mean? Are you suspecting this old man? Huh? Chengju sneered and said in a low voice, Before this matter is investigated clearly, everyone is a suspect. We can't get away with it. The most important thing now is to stop these elites and geniuses from entering. Send people to capture UNG immediately. Yes, as long as we capture him, the truth will be revealed. The High Priest nodded quickly and said through gritted teeth, This old man will make sure that little bastard dies without a burial place. Chengju ignored him and quickly opened her arms to block the entrance of the Divine Palace. She said to the hundreds of elites and geniuses, Everyone, please wait. There is a small problem inside the Divine Palace, and it will take a moment to deal with it. Please wait outside and don't enter the Divine Palace. Her deep and majestic voice spread across the square in front of the palace. Following her words, more than 20 Imperial guards immediately blocked the entrance of the Divine Palace with swords and sabers. The elites and geniuses on the steps and in the square in front of the palace were all stunned. The smiles and joy on everyone's faces froze. They all frowned and showed a puzzled and dissatisfied expression. Many of the bolder and more powerful nobles even loudly questioned the reason behind it. Commander Cheng, what do you mean by this? In the past, every baptism ceremony was safe and sound. Why did something happen when it's our turn? How long will it take you to deal with it? How will you compensate for delaying our baptism? What exactly happened? Please explain, Commander Cheng. Otherwise, we won't believe it. Someone took the lead and shouted, and many people echoed. Seeing that the situation was about to get out of control, everyone became agitated. Chengju looked dignified and shouted coldly, This is an order. Do I need to explain to you what I do? Whoever dares to take one step into the Divine Palace will be killed without mercy. Chengju was really angry, and her tone was full of murderous intent. The young elites and geniuses were shocked. They realized the seriousness of the matter and didn't dare to be noisy. They all whispered to each other. Chengju ignored them and quickly discussed countermeasures with the High Priest. High Priest, the theft of the divine bead is too serious. It's not something you and I can solve. Immediately send a message to Commander Mingi and report the cause of the matter to him. I will now send all the Imperial Guards to search for UNG in the Divine Palace, and you do. The High Priest was stunned, and his expression was hesitant. He smiled bitterly and said, Commander Cheng, is there a need to alarm Commander Mingi? Even now, he was still hoping that Chengju could bring people to capture UNG. It was best not to alert Commander Styx or the Blood Hell Marshal. Otherwise, this matter would be difficult to resolve, and he would be severely punished. Chapter 35:47. Hearing the high priest's words and looking at his expression, Chung Ju sneered. High priest, I know what you're thinking. In fact, Chung Zheng and I are responsible for Yuanji's entry into the Fortune Divine Palace. All three of us have made mistakes, and we must be punished. If we had the ability to solve this matter, I wouldn't have informed Commander Mingy. But the truth is, this matter is too serious, and neither of us can solve it. Listen to me. Report to Commander Mingy immediately. If we're late, our punishment will be worse. The high priest pondered for a moment and nodded. That's right. We'll take the initiative to report the situation and ask for Commander Mingy's punishment. It's better than him coming to question us for our negligence. After the two of them discussed the countermeasures, they began to split up. The high priest quickly took out a transmission jade slip and reported the situation to Commander Mingy. After sending out the transmission jade slip, he hesitated for a moment, then sent a transmission to Chung Zheng to explain the situation. By this time, Chung Ju had gathered more than a dozen Imperial Guards captains and sent out more than 600 Imperial Guards to search the Fortune Divine Palace in Yudu City. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The originally tranquil and peaceful Imperial Palace instantly became hostile and oppressive because of the dozen or so Imperial Guards that were brimming with murderous auras as they galloped out. The 100 or so elite geniuses on the square in front of the main hall felt that something was amiss when they saw the Imperial Guard's cold and murderous figures. Their discussion in secret became more intense. Everyone had a premonition that something big had happened. This matter involved the Fortune Divine Palace, and if there was even the slightest problem, it would not be a small matter. Some of the elites and geniuses had high status and were closely related to the Imperial Guards and Internal Affairs Department, or had secret information channels. In less than 15 minutes, these elite geniuses found out the reason. Someone had entered the Fortune Divine Palace in advance last night, tricked the High Priest, destroyed the Fortune Altar, and stole the Supreme Divine Bead. No one would have guessed that the daring bastard was actually the hedonistic young master, Yuan. When these elite geniuses heard the news, they were shocked beyond words, and it took them a long time to recover. Then, their blood boiled with excitement, and they hurriedly told the others about this matter. Regardless of whether they were gloating or seeking novelty, they couldn't help but spread the news. Not long after, close to 100 elite geniuses heard the news. Everyone was dumbfounded. They were so shocked that their minds went blank, and they prostrated themselves in admiration. After a short moment of silence, the crowd burst into a clamor of exclamations and curses. Holy shit, is Yuan going to defy the heavens? I knew that he was lawless and notorious, but I didn't expect him to be so arrogant. That is an altar built by His Majesty, the God Emperor himself. How dare he destroy the altar and steal the divine pearl? We can only accept the baptism of the divine light, but he stole the divine pearls. Awesome. It's so awesome that it's a mess. Young Master Yuan, you are a true warrior. However, that kid won't live past tonight. Everyone just wait and see. Yuan, you bastard. How dare you eat alone? Now that he has stolen the divine beads, where are we going to receive the baptism of the divine light? Hey, don't you think this news is ridiculous? With Yuan abilities, how could he destroy the altar and steal the divine pearls? It doesn't matter if it's true or not. Yuan didn't come, so he's a big suspect. Now that such a big thing has happened, he wants to implicate wind-soaring domain chief's manner. What a scammer. Numerous elite geniuses discussed animatedly, and the news quickly spread outside the Imperial Palace. In just 2 hours, the news had spread throughout Yudu City. Numerous rich and powerful families and strong practitioners had received the news. In an instant, the entire Yudu was discussing this matter. Countless people cried out in astonishment, feeling that it was inconceivable. Of course, everyone who received the news knew that this matter was too serious. A storm of blood was about to break out in Yudu, Chengju brought a few hundred Imperial guards and was searching Yudu City. The news of Yuan Ji stealing the divine pearls also spread quickly in Yudu, and everyone knew about it. The entire Yudu City was filled with an oppressive feeling that a storm was coming. Countless people were watching in secret, waiting for Yuan Ji to be sentenced to death and for Wind Soaring Domain Chief to be implicated and punished. As for Yuan Ji, the person involved, he was in a good mood and didn't panic at all. Before stealing the Creation Divine Bead, he had to plan carefully and use a strategy. He couldn't use force. However, after getting the Creation Divine Bead, he was fearless and unrestrained. Since he had the Divine Bead, he could kill or fight as he pleased. Even if he turned Yudu upside down, he wouldn't be afraid. After leaving the Creation Divine Palace, Ji Tianxing didn't hide his strength anymore. He executed the art of invisibility and escaped the detection of many Imperial guards. He left quietly without being discovered by anyone. After escaping the Imperial Palace, he didn't return to the Thousand Pine Courtyard, because he could guess that the High Priest and Chengju would definitely bring people to search there. Therefore, he secretly hid in a courtyard in the West City District. This mansion was located in a rather prosperous area, surrounded by rows of mansions and palaces. The courtyard was a little old and couldn't be considered extravagant or luxurious. Compared to the quiet and unique courtyards and magnificent palaces around it, it was a little shabby. This didn't match Yuan Ji's high profile and rich style at all. However, this courtyard was indeed Yuan Ji's. A few years ago, he secretly bought it behind everyone's back and prepared to do some shady business. Now, it was Ji Tianxing's turn to benefit. No one would expect him to hide in this courtyard. As the saying goes, the most dangerous place is the safest. After those Imperial guards search the Imperial Palace, they will definitely search the Thousand Pine Courtyard and the few places Yuan Ji frequents. If they can't find me, they will search the entire city. If they can't find me in Yudu, they will definitely think that I escaped back to the Soaring Wind region and hid in my hometown. Ha ha! At that time, the center of the storm will be in the Soaring Wind region, and Yudu will calm down. I will have a chance to leave. Ji Tianxing sat cross-legged in a secret room deep under the mansion as he muttered to himself with a cold smile on his face. Before coming to Yudu, he had already thought of his next itinerary and plan. First, he would seize the Creation Divine Bead, then leave the God world through the passage between the two worlds and go to the Dragon Realm to find Wuan. Currently, half of the plan was completed. He only needed to wait for the right time to enter the passage between the two worlds. However, he knew that it wouldn't be easy to pass through the passage between the two worlds. The passage between the two worlds was controlled by the god of the underworld, so it would definitely be heavily guarded and guarded by strong practitioners. Now, he had to calm down and plan well. If the theft of the Divine Bead can cause a bigger commotion and lure Marshal Blood Prison and Commander Mingy out of Yudu, how good would that be? Chapter 3548. Even though Ji Tianxing was looking forward to this outcome, he knew in his heart that it was almost impossible. Looks like I have to do something to spread this matter. Only then will I be able to lure the tiger away from the mountain. After pondering for a while, Ji Tianxing had an idea. He took out 2 transmission jade slips. He used Yuan Ji's tone to send a message to the 2 jade slips. One of the jade slips was sent to Calm Peace Divine King. The other jade slip was sent to Soaring Wind City's Domain Lord Assistant, Star Thunder Divine King. In the transmission, Star Thunder Divine King clearly stated that he was wrongly accused. It was obviously the High Priest who stole the Fortune Divine Pearl. He had entered the Fortune Divine Palace in advance and happened to witness the High Priest's evil deeds. The High Priest wanted to kill him to silence him, so he could only escape in a sorry state. In order to clear his name, the High Priest poured dirty water on him. But in reality, he was just a first-degree realm low-level god king. How could he have the ability to destroy the altar and steal the divine pearl? Now, there were countless emperor guards searching the city for him. There were also many experts who wanted to capture him. He was panicking and scared, so he could only hide. In the transmission jade slip, Ji Tianxing made up a realistic story, describing himself as being wronged. After doing all this, he took out divine pellets and source stones and started to circulate his cultivation technique to recover his god force. After all, he had been maintaining his peak state to break the array last night and had exhausted too much of his mental strength. In the depths of the Fortune Divine Palace, inside a magnificent palace, a golden armored guard strode in at a fast pace from the door of a secret chamber with dragons and phoenixes carved on it. This person looked anxious, and his footsteps were hurried. He was holding a transmission jade slip in his hands. Reporting to Senior Commander, the Fortune Divine Palace's High Priest sent a message. He has an urgent matter to report. The golden armored guard held the jade slip and bowed respectfully as he reported. After a while, the secret chamber's door slowly opened. The golden armored guard quickly entered the secret chamber with the jade slip. He stood in the middle of the secret chamber and knelt on one knee as he presented the jade slip. In the middle of the secret chamber's divine array sat a tall and sturdy middle-aged man with a domineering aura. This person was wearing a gray robe and a black cloak. His entire body was filled with an ice-cold aura of death, as if he was the god of death who had walked out from the underworld. He opened his black and white eyes and took the jade slip angrily. He shouted, "Don't you know that I'm cultivating in seclusion to break through to the 9th layer of the King God realm? How big of a matter is it that it would disturb my closed-door cultivation?" The golden armored guard hurriedly kowtowed and apologized, but he didn't dare to explain the situation. The great commander, who was like the Grim Reaper, was the right-hand man of the god of the underworld, Commander Styx, who was as famous as the Blood Hell Marshal. The Blood Hell Marshal was in charge of killing and war, while he was in charge of internal affairs and punishment. When the god of the underworld was not on the reincarnation island, the two of them were in charge. Of course, this was a period of peace without any wars. The Bloodhelm Marshal was relatively idle, and Commander Mingy had more authority. He frowned with displeasure and reached out to take the jade slip. As soon as he read 2 sentences with his divine sense, his body stiffened, and his expression became incomparably gloomy. After a moment, when he finished reading the contents of the jade slip, he immediately crushed the jade slip and grinned sinisterly. "Ha ha ha ha. This is the biggest joke in the world. A good-for-nothing who just broke through to the King God realm, known by the whole city, destroyed the creation altar, and stole the creation divine pearl. The god of the underworld, the rich resources created by the King God of the underworld, raised a good-for-nothing like the High Priest?" Commander Mingy was so angry that he laughed. He got up and walked out of the secret room to the study. His entire body was filled with a cold aura of death, and his chest was filled with monstrous anger. "Tell the High Priest to come see me. I want to see what tricks he's playing." A good-for-nothing played him like a fool. The golden armored guard said yes, and hurriedly went to pass on the order. 100 breaths later, in the study of Commander Mingy's residence, the High Priest stepped into the study, trembling with fear, and bowed to the stalwart figure by the window. This subordinate greets the Grand Commander. Commander Mingy's back was to him, and he was looking at the scenery outside the window. However, the study was bone-chillingly cold, and the cold aura of death lingered, causing the High Priest to shiver all over. Commander Mingy didn't turn his head. He asked in a cold, low voice, "High Priest, tell me, are you too stupid to be plotted against by that good-for-nothing? Or are you the one who made up this preposterous story?" Before the High Priest could answer, he added, "This one time, I will only ask you one question. I'm only going to ask this once. Think carefully before you answer." The High Priest didn't hesitate. He said in a sonorous voice, "Grand Commander, this subordinate swears on his godhead that every word this subordinate said in the jade slip is true. It is true that UNG infiltrated the Divine Palace, destroyed the altar, and stole the creation divine pearl. He entered the Divine Palace ahead of time. Both Cheng Zheng and Cheng Ju can testify to this. As for him destroying the altar and stealing the creation divine pearl, this subordinate saw it with my own eyes." Without waiting for him to finish, Commander Mingy sneered, If this is true, then you admit that you are worse than a good-for-nothing. The high priest immediately shut his mouth. His face turned pale, and he was so ashamed that he wanted to crawl into a hole. Commander Mingy turned around and stared coldly at him. "Look into my eyes." The high priest lowered his head in fear and resistance. He knew that Commander Mingy had the eyes of hell, an inconceivable ability. Not only could he use eye techniques to kill his opponents, but he could also read their souls and memories. "Do you want me to repeat myself?" Commander Mingy frowned and roared again. The high priest had no choice but to slowly raise his head and look into his eyes with a solemn heart. Suddenly, Commander Styx's eyes turned into the eyes of the underworld. They were black and white, and they spun rapidly like a deep vortex. The high priest lost his mind and fell into a coma. Meanwhile, Commander Nether River's consciousness had forcibly invaded his godhead and read his memories. Clearly, this was the best way to verify whether or not he was lying. At the same time, it was also the simplest and most violent method. At this moment, the high priest was like an unconscious puppet, his body frozen in place. His soul, memories, thoughts, and secrets were all exposed to Commander Nether River's eyes. After a full 100 breaths, Commander Mingy retracted his gaze, and his eyes returned to normal. The high priest gradually regained consciousness. He had a splitting headache, dizziness, and nausea, but he did not dare to show any dissatisfaction. Commander Mingy frowned and muttered to himself, "The Foneling region Lord really raised a good son. He actually deceived everyone. Ha ha! Good for nothing, good for nothing? What good disguise! I want to see if you're tired of being a region lord. Are you trying to rebel?" With that, Commander Mingy flung his Black Death cloak and strode out of the study. The high priest hurriedly followed and asked, "Commander, what do you need me to do? Just tell me." He had committed a grave mistake, so of course he had to find an opportunity to show his loyalty to reduce his punishment. Commander Mingy did not give him the chance. "I will personally make a trip to the Foneling region. You don't have to follow." Chapter 3549. 12 hours passed in a flash. For the entire day, rumors spread all over Yudu City, and everyone had different opinions. Everyone knew that UNG had snuck into the Fortune Divine Palace and stolen the Supreme Divine Bead. However, while countless people were shocked and enraged by UNG's actions, another theory spread like wildfire. Some people said that UNG was an ignorant and incompetent hedonistic young master who had just broken through to the God King realm. How could he have destroyed the altar and stolen the divine bead? There was more to this matter than met the eye. It was the high priest guarding the Fortune Divine Palace who had stolen the divine bead and framed UNG for it. Once this theory spread, it was immediately approved by the people. In everyone's eyes, this theory made sense. Otherwise, if a low-level god king could steal the divine bead, it would be beyond everyone's understanding. In addition, some people were secretly adding fuel to the fire, purposely spreading this theory. After a day, the views of the people of Yudu were divided into two factions. One faction believed that UNG had stolen the divine bead, while the other was adamant about not believing it. The two factions quarreled endlessly. These interludes added a layer of suspense to the matter. It was the dead of night again. Tianxing left the distorted space-time and returned to the secret chamber. The outside world was in an uproar, but he was as calm as a mountain, as if nothing had happened. He didn't care what the people of Yudu said. He only wanted to know the whereabouts of Commander Mingy and the Blood Prism Marshal. Only when these two experts left would he have a chance to sneak into the passage between the two worlds and leave Reincarnation Island. Therefore, he took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to the Calm Peace Divine King to ask about the situation. Soon, the Calm Peace Divine King sent back a message. Tianxing picked up the jade slip and read the message with his consciousness. The Calm Peace Divine King's voice immediately rang in his mind. "Young master, after a whole day, you've finally contacted me. I've already followed your instructions and spread the truth of the matter in Yudu City. Most people are willing to believe that you're innocent. I've also contacted a few other powerful families to add fuel to the fire. Young master, You must hide well. Don't show yourself, and don't go to places you frequent. I don't think those Imperial guards are bluffing. They're serious. You have to be careful. Today, they turned Yudu upside down, but they couldn't find you. I heard they're going to expand their search area tonight. Also, I have some bad news to tell you. This matter was too big and alarmed Great Commander Mingi. He had already left Yudu and was heading to Soaring Wind Domain personally. From the looks of it, the Grand Commander wants to personally meet the Domain Lord and exert pressure on the Domain Lord. Calm Peace Divine King was a loyal retainer. He absolutely believed that Yuan Ji was innocent. Therefore, Ji Tianxing hid in the nameless courtyard, but was able to control the Calm Peace Divine King to stir up trouble in the city. At the same time, he was also able to gather information from various sources. After reading the contents of the Jade Slip, Ji Tianxing put away the communication Jade Slip and revealed a gratified smile. Bad news? Commander Mingi has left Yudu and is heading to Soaring Wind Domain personally. This is the best news for me. He didn't care what kind of pressure Soaring Wind Domain Lord would have to endure. He only wanted to lure the tiger away from the mountain and find an opportunity to take action. Soaring Wind Domain Lord's personality is unyielding and unyielding. He is also an old friend of Commander Mingi and Martial Blood Prison. Even if Commander Mingi went to question him face to face, Soaring Wind Domain Lord would evade and deny it. This way, Commander Mingi would have to delay for at least 3 to 5 days before he could return to Yudu. Ji Tianxing frowned and silently analyzed the situation at hand. These 3 to 5 days are the best opportunity for me to take action. However, Martial Blood Prison is still in Yudu. How can I lure him away? Although he won't guard the passage between the two worlds personally, he is still a huge hidden danger. I have to guard against him. It was a pity that Ji Tianxing's time on Reincarnation Island was too short and his actions were too hasty. He was also alone and didn't have any friends or helpers. Even though he racked his brains for a long time, he couldn't think of a good way to alarm and lure Martial Blood Prison away. If there was enough time, he could slowly plan and come up with a perfect plan. But for now, he could only wait patiently and hope that things would take a turn for the better. Of course, he didn't forget to remind Calm Peace Divine King to pay attention to the movements of the outside world and report any news immediately. Soaring Wind Domain. In the vast and luxurious Domain Lord's manor, on a lonely peak that was thousands of feet tall in the backyard. The peak of the mountain, with a radius of 300 feet, was surrounded by clouds and mist. There were a few elegant and unique stone houses. There was a towering ancient tree in the small courtyard, and there was a stone table under the tree. It was suitable for drinking tea and playing chess. At this moment, Commander Mingi sat on a stone chair and stared expressionlessly at Soaring Wind Domain Lord in front of him. The Domain Master of the Soaring Wind region was a middle-aged God Clan warrior with a huge body and a full beard. He had a rough appearance, and his personality was fiery and stubborn. He was also somewhat domineering and dictatorial. It was because of this personality that Yuan Ji was raised to be an arrogant and hedonistic person. Great Commander, come and have some tea. Soaring Wind Domain Lord raised the teapot with a smile and poured a cup of spirit tea for Commander Mingi. He looked normal, and there was no change in his expression. He didn't panic or worry. Commander Mingi raised the teacup and took a sip. He sneered and said, "You boorish brute, when did you start learning how to make tea? You even live alone on this mountain peak. Are you going to cultivate your body and mind?" Soaring Wind Domain Lord nodded and said with a smile, "I was indeed rude and boorish in the past, so I'm trying to change. By the way, Great Commander, how does this heavenly spring spirit tea taste?" Commander Mingi sneered again and said in a playful tone, "Yuan Ba, don't talk nonsense with me. You should know why I'm here." Yuan Ba raised a teacup and slowly tasted it. He said leisurely, "Great Commander, we used to fight side by side and were like brothers. Let's not talk about the distant past. Let's talk about the most recent battle. It was 1,000 years ago in the Outer Realm. We worked together to kill Qin Shin. That great battle left both of us heavily injured, and we almost lost our lives. At that time, if you and I didn't help each other, we wouldn't be alive now. Now that you and I are in high positions, we've been idle for too long. We've been blinded by fame and fortune. We've forgotten our brotherhood and are only interested in small things. Don't you think it's funny?" Then he put down the teacup and looked at Commander Mingy with a smile. Commander Mingy frowned. His face was a bit gloomy as he said in a low voice, "Yuan Ba, are you reminding me not to forget our old relationship? Are you reminding me to be considerate in this matter and punish your playboy son lightly?" "No, no, no." Soaring Wind Domain Lord hurriedly waved his hand and said with a smile, "I'm just thinking about the brotherhood of the past. As for my son, he didn't do anything. How can he be punished?" Chapter 3550. Yuan Ba's words made Commander Mingy frown again. His lips curled into a sinister smile. "He didn't do anything? Yuan Ba, when did you become so protective? Why are you so confident in your son? Or is it because you ordered him to do so?" Commander Mingy was very forceful and overbearing. His whole body was filled with a cold and dignified aura of death. Yuan Ba frowned unhappily. He said in a serious tone, "Commander, you've gone too far. I've never been ambitious. I'm already satisfied to be able to receive the recognition of the God Emperor and reach this step. I've been meditating in seclusion for the past few hundred years. How could I order my son to do such a disgraceful thing?" After a pause, he continued, "I don't believe my son has done anything wrong. I'm not being protective. I know my son too well. I know what he's capable of. Even if there are rumors out there, do you believe my son has the ability to destroy the creation altar and steal the god bead? I don't care if you believe it or not. I don't believe it. Look, that little bastard knows he's in trouble. He's hiding outside and doesn't dare to come back. He's still the same bastard as before. He's also irresponsible." After saying this, Yuan Ba laughed bitterly at himself. Commander Mingy was expressionless. He said coldly, "I believe it. Besides, I've investigated the truth before coming to you." Yuan Ba was stunned. Then he sneered, "What truth? Did you see my son destroy the creation altar and steal the god bead with your own eyes?" Commander Mingy shook his head. "Of course I didn't see it, but the high priest did." "That's right." Yuan Ba chuckled and said, "I've always felt that you should properly interrogate the high priest instead of keeping an eye on my son. No matter how much evidence and suspicion you have, you can't change the fact that my son has just broken through to the God King realm. He's only in the first layer of the God King realm. He can't even set up a few low-grade King realm divine formations. Do you expect him to break a top-grade King realm divine formation? If he really had the ability to break one, he'd be even stronger than me. Then I'd be smiling in the underworld." Commander Nether River frowned and was rather speechless. "Yuan Ba, you better be serious. Why do I feel that you are willing to believe that it was Yuan Ji who stole the divine pearl?" Yuan Ba stared at him and asked, "If my son can really solve the King Grey divine formation, shouldn't I be happy? That was called the student surpassing the master. That was the fortune bestowed by the heavens, an unprecedented miracle. If the Yuan family really has such a monstrous talent, I wouldn't hesitate to die right now." Yuan Ba's nonchalant attitude left Commander Styx completely helpless. "Yuan Ba, stop talking nonsense with me. Don't you realize the seriousness of this matter? Do you have to alarm His Majesty the God Emperor before you are willing to wake up and regret?" Hearing these two sentences, Yuan Ba's face immediately darkened. He was also very angry. He sneered angrily and said, "Chief Commander, I've said everything that needs to be said. If you continue to pester me, then I can only conclude that if you want to condemn someone, you can always find a pretext. You are deliberately slandering me and framing me. Is His Majesty the God Emperor going to purge his old subordinates? So, as the Chief Commander of Internal Affairs, you're going to start with me first? My son is a bit of a spoiled brat and a bit arrogant, but he didn't make any big mistakes. You are making an issue out of him and making up such a ridiculous accusation. Doesn't your conscience hurt?" Commander Styx was speechless. The more Yuan Ba thought about it, the angrier he got. He shouted angrily, "Anyway, I'll say this. If you really want to purge your old subordinates, then do it openly. Just say it. Don't play this game with me. At worst, I will resign from my position as the leader. I only ask that you let my son go. Let's say, if a miracle happens and my son suddenly becomes a monstrous talent and really steals the divine pearl, then he will be the best of the Yuan family. Then he will be the most promising child of the Yuan clan. I, Yuan Ba, will take the blame for him. If you want to kill me, come at me. Yuan Ba laid his cards on the table. This time, Commander Styx completely lost his temper. Forget it, you unreasonable bastard. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Commander Styx stood up angrily and left in a huff. Yuan Ba's anger completely disappeared. He even waved his hand with a smile. Take care, Chief Commander. Come again when you have time. Commander Styx flew into the clouds and immediately stopped. He turned to look at Yuan Ba and said angrily, What are you happy about? I didn't say I was leaving Soaring Wind region. Give me 2 days to calm down. I want to investigate this matter personally. I must find out the truth. Otherwise, I won't be able to answer to the God Emperor. Yuan Ba immediately withered. He couldn't help but roll his eyes and mutter, Damn, I thought you were going to leave. Then go ahead and investigate. As long as you don't deliberately frame me, you can investigate whatever you want. Unreasonable. Commander Styx cursed with a cold face and turned to leave. Yuan Ba quickly returned to normal. He slowly drank his tea. In his mind, he imagined his son suddenly becoming a monstrous talent, punching a high-level deity king and kicking the reincarnation deity general. Thinking of this, he was immediately in a good mood. His face was filled with the kind smile of an old father. He couldn't help but hum a little tune. Unknowingly, another day and night passed. In these 24 hours, Yudu was still filled with rumors and opinions. Chengju led thousands of imperial guards and searched Yudu City again. Then, they gave up on Yudu City and began to search along the way to Soaring Wind region. In their minds, Yuan Ji must have left Yudu long ago and was on his way back to Soaring Wind region. The continuous running exhausted Chengju. He gritted his teeth in hatred. The high priest stayed behind in the creation divine palace. It was as if he had lost his soul. He spent every day in fear and anticipation. As for the hundreds of elite geniuses who received the baptism, they were thoroughly disappointed and had completely given up. They knew that they wouldn't be able to get the creation divine bead back anytime soon. There was no point in continuing to wait in the imperial palace. They might as well go home and find their own mothers. Of course, these people not only hated Yuan Ji, but also the high priest. If it weren't for these two bastards, they would have happily accepted the baptism and become geniuses. At the same time, in the secret chamber of the Nameless House, Ji Tianxing was keeping track of the outside world through the Calm Peace Divine King as a spy. At the same time, he suddenly thought of a seemingly feasible method to lure the Blood Prison Marshal away. However, this method was a little risky. He still needed Ji Ku's cooperation. Thus, he took out the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and entered the distorted space to find Ji Ku. However, when he returned to the Blood Flame Sacred Tree, before he could see Ji Ku, his attention was attracted by the 7-color divine light that shot into the sky. The beautiful figure under the sacred tree became as dazzling as the sun, emitting boundless divine power. Without a doubt, she had broken through. Chapter 35:51. 2 days had passed since Ji Tianxing obtained the creation divine pearl. Meanwhile, Yun Yao had been cultivating in seclusion for more than 3 months in the distorted space-time. She had successfully merged with the creation divine pearl and finally gathered all 7 pearls, successfully breaking through to the God King realm. At this moment, she was more dazzling than the sun and more sacred than the silver moon. Boundless rainbow divine light covered the brilliance of the blood flame sacred tree and illuminated everything within 100,000 miles. Vast and mighty divine power spread out without restraint. The blood flame sacred tree and the people cultivating under the sacred tree all benefited greatly from the boundless divine power. A worldly phenomenon appeared above the blood flame sacred tree. The worldly phenomenon was very special and completely different from the other god kings. An indomitable and majestic goddess stood at the peak of the boundless sea of clouds. Beneath her feet was a five-clawed golden dragon and a crimson flame phoenix. Behind her, the sun and moon could be vaguely seen, as well as the stars and the vast void. If one looked closely, they would discover that the sea of clouds was formed by billions of living beings of the human race. Clearly, this worldly phenomenon was the majestic image of the mother of the human race, the ancient goddess Yaoguang. Ji Tianqing looked up at the phenomenon above the sacred tree and revealed a gratified smile. Recalling the past, he felt a little emotional and muttered to himself, "From the very beginning of the Sky Pillar sect, we walked hand in hand and weathered too many trials and tribulations. From the first Neptunian Divine Pearl to the seventh Creation Divine Pearl, only the heavens know how difficult it was for us. Only now have her Godhead, Divine Soul, and memories fully recovered. She has truly been reborn as Yaoguang. Her memories should be complete, and she will return to her peak very soon." After 3 whole days, the heaven and earth anomaly that covered the sky finally dissipated. The rainbow divine light that covered 100,000 miles gradually thinned until it completely disappeared. When it distorted, the sky returned to normal. Yun Yao gradually ended her cultivation and opened her eyes. Right now, her appearance did not change much, but her temperament had improved. She was already as beautiful as a painting, cold and dignified. Now, she had become even more holy and dignified, with a hint of motherly radiance. Ji Tianqing landed beside her and said with a smile, "Yao Yao, you've finally broken through to the Divine King realm. Now, you can be considered to have enjoyed the fruits of your labor." Yin Yao nodded and said gently, "This is all thanks to your help. If you hadn't taken the risk to sneak into the Fortune Divine Palace, I don't know when I would have been able to break through. Ji Tianqing, as long as you can break through to the Divine King level, my risk is worth it. All right, you've already fused with 7 Divine Pearls. You should have recovered all your memories, right?" Yin Yao thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "I've basically recovered, but I'm missing some fragmented memories. However, I should be able to recover slowly in the future." Ji Tianqing's eyes lit up, and he said expectantly, "I've always wanted to know what exactly happened in the Antiquity Age 30,000 years ago. The demon race, the 5 elemental world, and Goddess Yaoguang were all closely related? Since you've recovered your memories, why don't you tell me about it?" Yin Yao smiled and shook her head. She said gently, "Things back then were very complicated. The truth is too shocking, and I don't dare to confirm whether my memories are real or fake. Moreover, my memories are still in the process of recovering, and they're still very messy. Wait patiently. I'll definitely tell you when I've sorted out my memories." Ji Tianqing wasn't surprised by this and nodded. "And I'm a little impatient. Then, continue to cultivate and nourish your divine Tao foundation. I won't disturb you any further." Yin Yao nodded slightly and went into seclusion to consolidate her foundation and cultivation. Ji Tianqing got up and left. He flew 10,000 feet away and landed beside Ji Ke. Ji Ke was cultivating wholeheartedly, working hard to break through to the second stage of the God King realm. Ji Tianqing called out to her through his divine will. She quickly ended her cultivation and opened her eyes. "Big brother Tianqing, why are you looking for me?" Ji Ke stared at Ji Tianqing and asked. She knew that unless it was urgent, Ji Tianqing wouldn't disturb her cultivation. As expected, Ji Tianqing smiled and said, "I've encountered a troublesome matter and need your help." Ji Ke nodded without hesitation. "Okay, what do I need to do?" Ji Tianqing waved his hand and explained, "Cuckoo, don't be anxious. Listen me tell you about the current situation. I'm in Reincarnation Islands, Yuta now. I've taken over a hedonistic young master and snuck into the Creation Divine Palace to help Yao Yao obtain the divine bead." He briefly explained the current situation and situation. After Ji Ke finished listening, she immediately understood what he meant. "Big brother Tianqing, you want me to lure away the Blood Prison Marshal and the experts of Yudu to create an opportunity for you to enter the passage between the 2 worlds?" Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "That's more or less what I mean. Jika frowned in confusion and asked, "But I'm too weak and haven't shown my face and you do. How can I lure away the blood prison marshal?" Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "If you appear with your true face, you won't attract anyone's attention. With your current strength, it's difficult to stir up any waves. However, you can use Yuanji's identity to lure away those experts. You lure them away from Yudu, and I'll take the opportunity to sneak into the passage between the two worlds with the Divine Pagoda. When you encounter danger, or when the time is right, you can use the Phoenix's nest to instantly return to the Divine Pagoda." Ji Qianxing told her his idea and plan. After saying that, he added worriedly, "Cuckoo, there are two problems now. First, can you accept controlling Yuanji's body? Second, do you still remember the Phoenix's nest?" Phoenix's nest was a divine art that Ji Tianxing had imparted to Ji Wushuang before he ascended to the God realm. Ji Ku studied it and learned it easily. However, after everyone ascended to the God realm, they never used that divine art again. As a result, Ji Tianxing almost forgot about this secret technique. Ji Ku thought for a moment and nodded. "Brother Tianxing, these are not problems. If you can possess Yuanji, so can I. Besides, I'm also at the first level of the Divine King realm. I don't need to suppress my strength, and I'm not afraid of being exposed. As for the Phoenix's nest, I can return to the Divine Pagoda at any time, even if I don't use this divine art." Ji Tianxing nodded and smiled. "I forgot that you are the true master of the 9 Heavens, 10 Absolutes Pagoda. All right, since there's no problem, let's give it a try." "All right." After that, Ji Tianxing brought Ji Ku out of the distorted space. The two of them appeared in the secret chamber, and Ji Tianxing returned to the appearance of a dragon youth. Ji Ku left his original body on the 9th level of the Divine Pagoda and used his divine personality to possess Yuanji's body. Next, Ji Tianxing became the dragon youth that no one knew, and Ji Ku became Yuanji. Ji Tianxing sent a message to Calm Peace Divine King and asked about the situation in the outside world, as well as news about Martial Blood Prison. He also reminded him of a few things. After making sufficient preparations, he took the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda and left the nameless house. Not long after, Ji Ku took advantage of the quiet night and left quietly. Chapter 35:52. 1,000 years ago, Kenshin stayed on Reincarnation Island for a period of time. Although he didn't travel all over Reincarnation Island and didn't know much about it. However, he still knew the location and general situation of the passage between the two worlds. North of Yudu City, there was the abyss of reincarnation 90,000 miles away. In ancient legends, it was the entrance to death and reincarnation. It was very eerie and terrifying. But in reality, those legends could only fool those who didn't know. The top powerhouses all knew that it was actually the passage between the two worlds. After entering the abyss of reincarnation, one could dive to the deepest part of the ground and pass through the passage between the two worlds to reach the mysterious dragon realm. 1,000 years ago, before the god of the underworld unified Reincarnation Island, the passage between the two worlds was controlled by a few ancient clans. In that era, there were still frequent interactions between the God realm and the Dragon realm. For example, when Kenshin ascended back then, he first ascended to the Dragon realm before returning to the God realm. But now, the passage between the two worlds was controlled by the god of the underworld. Ji Tianxing secretly asked around for a long time, but he didn't hear of any powerhouses from the Dragon realm coming to the God realm. He couldn't help but worry. Did the god of the underworld order the passage to be sealed and not allow the passage between the two worlds? After leaving the nameless house, he leisurely traveled through Yudu and headed north. Even though Yudu City was bustling with noise, the people were still discussing the theft of the Divine Pearl. But all of this had nothing to do with Ji Tianxing. He was now a dragon youth. He was really ordinary and unremarkable. As he walked towards the North City Gate, his consciousness secretly paid attention to Ji Ku's movements. At this moment, Ji Ku had taken over Yuanji and was silently passing through the night, escaping towards the South City Gate. She carefully disguised herself and covered her appearance and face. Ordinary people couldn't recognize her, as Yun-ji at all. Just like that, she passed through half of Yudu without any danger and arrived at the South City Gate. Even though it was late at night, the South City Gate was still open. However, there were nearly 100 city guards at the gate, and a Divine King Realm commander overseeing it. Jiku was initially safe and had not been exposed. A few city guards checked her identity token and casually asked her a few questions before waving their hands to let her go. However, at this moment, the guard commander stopped Jiku. Stop! The burly guard commander was wearing a golden dragon chainmail and had a god-slaying saber at his waist. He stared at Jiku with a stern expression and sized him up. Why are you sneaking out of the city alone in the middle of the night? This king finds you suspicious. Immediately take off your cloak and veil. This king wants to examine you carefully. Jiku pretended to be fearful and told a lie that he had long prepared. He stammered, "Sir, I've been poisoned by a strong poison. My face is completely ruined, and I've never dared to show my true face. What did I do wrong? Why do you need to check me so carefully?" The guard commander frowned and sneered. "Why do I need to check? A divine item has been stolen from the Imperial Palace, and the Imperial Guards are currently searching for the culprit. Of course, we, the city guards, have to cooperate fully. Don't be so secretive. This king thinks you are very suspicious. Immediately take off your veil and cloak for inspection. Otherwise, this king will arrest you immediately." As he spoke, the guard commander pressed his right hand on the hilt of his saber and exuded a terrifying murderous aura. A few city guards not far away also surrounded them and stared at Jiku with vigilance. Jiku quickly waved his hand and said, "Sir, please calm down. I'll cooperate with the inspection." Then, he pretended to take off his veil so that the guard commander would let down his guard. The next moment, he suddenly tore off the black veil and threw it at the guard commander. At the same time, her body lit up with a dazzling divine light, and she flew out of the city gate at lightning speed. Whoosh! With a flash of fire, she flew out of the city gate and escaped into the night at lightning speed toward the south. The guard commander reached out to catch the black veil and stared at Jiku. He frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, his expression changed drastically. "It's him. It's Yun-ji. Catch him quickly. We can't let him escape." Although Jiku had taken off her veil just now, the guard commander had only taken a glance at her. However, the guard commander had seen Yun-ji before and recognized him on the spot. Even though he couldn't figure it out, didn't Yun-ji escape from Yuta long ago? Why did he appear at this time and escape alone? However, this wasn't important. The guard commander chased after him without hesitation. He would rather kill the wrong person than let him go. Swoosh! He held the god-slaying saber in his hand and chased out of the city gate at lightning speed, rushing south. Immediately, more than 20 of the city guards at the city gate followed him. Moreover, the guard captain hurriedly took out a communication jade scroll and reported this news to his superiors. This was a huge contribution and an excellent opportunity to be promoted. Following that, the 24 city guards whistled through the night sky as they chased after the man to the south. Ji Tianxing hid in the darkness near the North City Gate and used his divine consciousness to monitor this scene, waiting patiently. In any case, his divine consciousness could cover a radius of 80,000 miles. He could clearly see the movements of Jiku and the city guards. About 100 breaths later, Jiku had fled to the south for 60,000 miles. Without leaving any trace, she slowed down and pretended that the captain of the guards had caught up with her. The guard commander was already full of excitement. The huge contribution and reward had gone to his head. From what he knew, Yun-ji was a good-for-nothing who had just broken through to the Divine King realm. He was so weak that he wasn't worth mentioning. Therefore, he pounced forward without hesitation, waving the god-slaying saber and slashing at Jiku majestically. Yun-ji, you disgraceful traitor. If you don't surrender now, don't blame me for being merciless. Jiku wasn't afraid. He sneered in Yun-ji's tone. Even if I've made a huge mistake, I'm not someone a small fry like you can deal with. You want to capture me and receive a reward? Go to hell. As he spoke, Jiku took out the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Spear. Holding the spear with both hands, he thrust out the five-color divine fire and started a fight with the guard commander. Boom, boom, boom. The divine techniques used by the two clashed fiercely in the night sky, creating a deafening sound. The dazzling five-color divine light lit up an area of 20,000 miles, making the night sky as bright as day. The huge commotion and light shadows allowed everyone in Yudu City to see them clearly. The two sides had only exchanged a dozen blows when the heavenly phoenix divine spear pierced through the guard commander's forehead. His head exploded on the spot. Without a doubt, the guard commander, who was at the second level of the divine king realm, was easily killed by Jiku. Even his godhead was shattered by the heavenly phoenix divine spear and scattered in the night sky. Jiku quickly picked up the godhead fragments and was about to continue fleeing south. At this moment, the 20-odd city guards caught up with him again. They saw with their own eyes that the guard commander was killed. They were scared out of their wits and didn't dare to attack. After all, they were just middle-level and upper-level divine lords. Even the guard commander had been easily killed by UNG. If they attacked, they would only be killed in an instant. However, while the city guards didn't attack, UNG took the initiative to attack. Chapter 35:53. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Jiku swung his heavenly phoenix divine spear, sending out spear shadows that covered the sky and divine fire that filled the sky. In an instant, more than half of the city guards were killed, and even their divine bodies were burned to ashes. Only 3 city guards were left, and they were lucky enough to survive. However, they were already scared out of their wits. They all screamed and turned to escape toward Yudu. Jiku didn't chase after them and allowed them to escape. He turned around and continued flying south. The 3 city guards escaped 20,000 miles away in a panic. When they saw that Jiku didn't chase after them, they panted in shock. After they calmed down, they immediately sent out a signal arrow for help and reported the incident to the city guard governor. Coincidentally, the city guard governor was Qian Yuan, the young master who didn't get along with UNG. Originally, with his abilities, he wasn't qualified to sit in this position and lead tens of thousands of city guards. However, he was a top-notch noble, and his family was powerful. The elders in his family forced him to take this position. After the news of UNG stealing the divine bead spread, Qian Yuan was in a good mood and took pleasure in his misfortune. He was no longer as lazy as before. He actually brought people to patrol the city gates every day to search for UNG. If he could capture UNG personally and hand him over to Commander Mingi, that would be wonderful. Stepping on his opponent to rise to the top and seeing UNG being executed while he received the reward for his meritorious service. Was there anything better than that? When Jiku killed the guard commander, Qian Yuan was in the palace near the South City Gate. He also saw the divine light that filled the sky and heard a loud bang. Just as he flew out of the South City Gate to check out what was going on, the guard captain sent him a message. After reading the message, Qian Yuan frowned and revealed a look of astonishment. UNG, this bastard, is actually so scheming and shrewd to hide from everyone. Everyone thought that he had long escaped from Yudu and rushed back to Soaring Wind region. Who would have thought that he had been hiding in Yudu all this time? Only now that everyone has let down their guard did he escape in the middle of the night. Luckily, Commander Wang saw the flaw and sacrificed his life to delay UNG's footsteps. This prince's chance to make a contribution has come. Qian Yuan held the communication jade slip in his hand and muttered to himself excitedly. His heart was full of expectations. However, he did not let the excitement get to his head. The death of the guard commander made him realize that UNG was not simple. At the very least, this fellow who could steal the divine orb was definitely not a good-for-nothing. He was a hidden expert. His previous image of trash was all a disguise. Thinking of this, Qian Yuan hesitated. I have just reached the second level of the divine king realm. In terms of strength, talent, and foundation, I am just a little bit stronger than the guard commander. If he was killed by UNG so quickly, then I'm definitely no match for UNG. Even if I did my best, I would only be able to stall for time, and I would be seriously injured by UNG. It's almost impossible for me to catch UNG alone. Qian Yuan originally wanted to look for helpers and asked for the help of two stronger mid-level god kings. However, if that was the case, they would have to share the credit. Even if he could make a contribution and receive a reward, it would be greatly reduced. He was very unwilling to do so. Therefore, he only hesitated for a moment before deciding to take the risk. I'll chase after UNG first and deal with him to stall for time. On the other hand, I need to send a message to Commander Mingy. No, Senior Commander is still in Soaring Wind region. Then I can only inform Marshal Blood Prison. As long as I can stall for time, Marshal Blood Prison will arrive, and UNG will be dead. In this way, the credit will only belong to me and Marshal Blood Prison. Marshal Blood Prison is a senior expert, a 9th level god king. He will definitely disdain to snatch the credit from me. Therefore, the credit will still belong to me, haha. Qian Yuan's analysis made him feel enlightened. He admired his own intelligence and wisdom. He was in a good mood and immediately took out the communication jade slip to report the situation to Marshal Blood Prison. Then, he brought a few guard captains and left Yudu at lightning speed, rushing to the south. Ji Tianxing had been hiding near the North City Gate, secretly observing the situation. Ji Ku purposely revealed his identity. This was the first step of the plan. Killing the guard captain, blowing up the matter, and alerting the city guard governor was the second step. As expected, after a short while, Ji Tianxing saw Qian Yuan bringing a few guard captains and hurriedly flying out of the South City Gate to chase after Ji Ku. Up to now, everything was going according to plan. After Ji Ku killed Qian Yuan, the matter would blow up further. By then, the news of Yuan Ji escaping in the middle of the night would spread. The God King experts who stayed behind in Yudu would most likely be lured to the south and fight to kill Ji Ku. As for whether Marshal Blood Prison would go personally, that would depend on the will of heaven. Once many God King experts surrounded Ji Ku, she would abandon Yuan Ji's body and escape back to Nine Heaven's Tenju Tower in a moment of life and death. This was Ji Tianxing's plan. He was sure that this method would definitely lure many God Kings away. However, Marshal Blood Prison was an uncertain factor, and he wasn't confident. At this moment, he still didn't know that Qian Yuan, who didn't get along with Yuan Ji, had secretly helped him. The night was dark, and the cold wind was like a knife. Qian Yuan brought 4 guard captains and rushed to the south at the fastest speed to chase after the fleeing Yuan Ji. Along the way, Qian Yuan was full of anticipation and was in high spirits. The 4 guard captains were full of worry and couldn't help but ask, "Governor Qian, are we going to capture Yuan Ji alone?" Rumor has it that the kid destroyed the creation altar and stole the divine bead. Just now, he even killed the guard captain. From this, we can see that he is very powerful. If we go, we will just be sending ourselves to our deaths. Qian Yuan frowned and pretended to be dignified as he reprimanded. "We are enforcing the law impartially and helping Tianxing. What's there to be afraid of? How can we destroy our own morale and boost others' prestige? Besides, we only need to deal with Yuan Ji and try to delay as much time as possible. I have already reported this to Marshal Blood Prison. We just need to hold on until he arrives." Hearing him say this, the 4 guard captains were slightly at ease. Unknowingly, 15 minutes passed. Everyone flew 100,000 miles to the south, far away from Yudu. Qian Yuan was indeed capable. With the divine arts passed down in his family, he was actually able to track the aura of Yuan Ji's divine power. Finally, they caught up to Yuan Ji in the sky above Great Clear River. Yuan Ji, who was wearing a black robe and a cape, had a messy aura of divine power. He looked like he was injured. His flying speed wasn't fast, and he kept looking around like a bird startled by the twang of a bow. Seeing this, Qian Yuan and the other guard captains dispelled the doubts in their hearts. The worry and fear in their hearts immediately dissipated by more than half. As expected, everyone is spreading false rumors and overestimating Yuan Ji. This king has said long ago that he is just a good-for-nothing who can't be shown in public. I thought he was a monster and strong. I didn't expect him to only have this much ability. Qian Yuan sneered and brought the 4 guard captains to attack. Sogu. Chapter 35-54. Yuan Ji, It's time for you to die. Before he arrived, Qian Yuan's angry shout had reached Ji Ke's ears. She immediately stopped above Tai Ching River, holding the heavenly phoenix divine spear, and turned to look at Qian Yuan and the others. Swish! 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 Qian Yuan and the 4 guard captains immediately spread out and surrounded her. Ji Ke frowned and stared at Qian Yuan with a gloomy look. He said in a low voice, Qian Yuan? It's you bastard. Qian Yuan originally wanted to stall for time. Seeing Yuan Ji in such a difficult situation, he was not in a hurry to make a move. Of course, he would mock him to his heart's content. Ha! Yuan Ji, you didn't expect to fall into my hands, did you? If you knew this would happen, why did you do it? Come on, kneel down and beg for mercy. Bark like a dog, and I'll consider leaving your corpse intact. Qian Yuan's face was filled with schadenfreude as he sneered in a mocking manner. Ji Ke's eyes became sharper, and he scolded with hatred. You want to catch me, you trash? You must be tired of living. Qian Yuan was not angry and said with a smile, Yuan Ji, I've fought with you for so many years, and I know very well how capable you are. I've already said that you're too arrogant, domineering, stupid, and brainless. Sooner or later, you'll court death. Seeing him speak so frankly, Ji Ke immediately realized that he was deliberately stalling for time. Qian Yuan, you talk so much nonsense. You must be scared and don't dare to attack me. If I'm not wrong, you must have called for help and are waiting for them to come, right? Ji Ke stared at Qian Yuan with a gloomy look and sneered contemptuously. Qian Yuan frowned and said in his heart, this is bad. Ji Ke was not in a hurry to make a move. He sneered and asked, I'd like to know, who exactly did you ask for help? Don't ask for help from your scoundrel friends. They're too weak to be killed by me. Being looked down upon like this, Qian Yuan was ashamed and angry. He gritted his teeth and scolded, Yuan Ji, you're about to die, but you still dare to be arrogant? I've already notified the Blood Prison Marshal, and he'll come here soon to take your life personally. If you surrender and beg for mercy now, maybe you can keep your life for the sake of your father. But if you continue to resist, no one can save you. Blood Prison Marshal? Ji Ke's eyes lit up as she thought to herself, great. Qian Yuan, this trash, knows that his strength is not enough, but he wants to take all the credit. So he didn't ask for help from others' help and to report directly to Blood Prison Marshal. An expert like the Blood Prison Marshal would not even bother to compete with a junior for credit. But this is also good. Brother Tianxing was worried about not being able to lure the Blood Prison Marshal away. This Qian Yuan is a great help. When Qian Yuan saw that Ji Ke was silent, he immediately revealed a smug sneer. Ha ha! Yuan Ji, do you know how serious the situation is now? Hurry up and surrender. Don't dawdle. Blood Prison Marshal will be here soon. Ji Ke's thoughts were interrupted. He sneered and said, Qian Yuan, you're right. Time is of the essence. We can't waste any more time. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly unleashed all of her power and waved the heavenly phoenix divine spear. 5-color divine flames covered the sky. Go to hell. With her angry roar, thousands of flaming spear lights fell from the sky and enveloped the world. The 5-color divine flames covered the sky and the sun, sealing off the area and engulfing Qian Yuan and the 4 guard captains. The space instantly turned into a fiery purgatory. Qian Yuan didn't expect that Yuan Ji would be so crazy and suddenly start a killing spree. Moreover, this guy's strength and magical means were more than 10 times stronger than before. The power was terrifying. Qian Yuan's face was pale. He quickly asked the 4 guard captains to resist. He wanted to retreat as fast as he could to avoid the bombardment of the spear lights and divine flames. Boom, boom, boom. In the next moment, the sky full of spear lights and divine flames fell, bombarding everyone and pouring into the Tai Ching River. Immediately, those 4 High Divine Lord Realm Guard captains were blasted into dregs on the spot, then burned to ashes by the divine fire. Under Ji Ke's divine spear, they couldn't even resist one move and were instantly turned into ashes. Even Qian Yuan was hit by dozens of spear lights and flew back while vomiting blood. When he finally stabilized himself after retreating 3,000 miles, he was already in an extremely sorry state. Not only was his divine body injured, but his armor, clothes, and hair were also burned. My God! Qian Yuan was shocked, as if he had seen a ghost. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Why does this trash look like a different person? Has he swallowed the divine fortune bead? It must be so. Otherwise, he couldn't have become so powerful in just a few days." Qian Yuan was so shocked that he didn't care about the death of the 4 guard captains and forgot his mission. Seeing Yuan Ji waving the heavenly phoenix divine spear again, Qian Yuan woke up from his daze and immediately fled in panic. No, this guy is too strong. I can't even stall for time. If I get hit by him a few more times, even if I don't die, my divine body will be destroyed. If his divine body was really destroyed, even if he received any credit or reward, it would still be a huge loss. However, even if Qian Yuan didn't accept the challenge, it was useless to hide and run. Jiku was extremely fast and blocked him in the blink of an eye, waving his divine spear and fiercely attacking. Nirvana Flame. Phoenix Dance 9 Heavens. With a series of angry shouts, the heavenly phoenix divine spear spilled out endless divine flames and thousands of spear lights. The divine flames sealed off the surrounding 20,000 miles. Thousands of spear lights danced like dragons and phoenixes, dazzling and powerful. The ground below was scorched, and the Taiching River evaporated and dried up, turning into a barren land. Qian Yuan took out his life-saving trump card and blocked the attacks in a wretched state. Unfortunately, he could only block a dozen moves before his life-saving mid-grade King Grey Divine weapon was smashed into pieces and burned into scrap metal. Next, his doomsday arrived. Dozens of flaming spear lights struck him and turned him into dregs on the spot. The pieces of his divine body that fell from the sky were burned into ashes by the divine flames and scattered among the scorched earth. When the battle ended, there were only a dozen shards of godhood floating down from the night sky. Swoosh! Jiku put away his heavenly phoenix divine spear and waved his hand to grab the shards of godhood, putting them into his spatial ring. She knew that Ji Tianxing had the divine art of devouring, and he could devour the shards of godhood to raise his abilities quickly. Even though Qian Yuan's abilities were very weak, no matter how small a mosquito's leg was, it was still meat. These shards of godhood couldn't be wasted. Soon, the flames in the sky dispersed, and the night sky regained its silence. Jiku stood in the night sky with heavenly phoenix divine spear in his hand as he looked in the direction of Yudu. Looking at the time, Marshal Blood Prison should be here by now, right? As long as he chases after me, I'll just have to run south for a distance and complete my mission. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3555. Jiku was filled with hope as she flew south at a moderate pace, waiting for the arrival of Blood Prison Marshal. She thought to herself that Qian Yuan was the city guard's governor and was considered a person of high status. He personally sent a message to Blood Prison Marshal, saying that he had discovered Yuan Ji and was pursuing him with all his might. Logically speaking, Blood Prison Marshal shouldn't ignore it and would most likely take action personally. As long as Blood Prison Marshal left Yudu, Ji Tianxing could head to the passage between the two worlds without worry. Taking a step back, a strong practitioner like Blood Prison Marshal might send a clone to capture Yuan Ji. This was also good. At least he could confirm the location of Blood Prison Marshal. As long as he wasn't near the passage between the two worlds, even if he stayed in Yudu City, it wouldn't affect Ji Tianxing's plan. In short, Jiku felt that she was very close to success. At this moment, she had already traveled hundreds of thousands of miles south and had long exceeded the range of Ji Tianxing's divine consciousness. Ji Tianxing was still at the North City gate of Yudu, patiently waiting for news. In order not to make him worry, Jiku sent him a message to explain the situation as she hurried along. Brother Tianxing, I've already followed the plan and killed the guard commander and Governor Qian Yuan one after another. The commotion from the battle should have alarmed the God King powerhouses in Yudu City. There's good news that we didn't expect. Qian Yuan only brought a few guard captains to capture me. He wants to take all the credit for himself, so he sent a message to Blood Prison Marshal for help. If nothing unexpected happens, the Blood Prison Marshal should come after me. Prepare to leave the city and head north. Don't worry about me. I'll evacuate in time. After sending the message, Jiku focused on hurrying along and observing her surroundings vigilantly. Blood Prison Marshal's strength was too strong. She was also worried that he would approach silently and instantly capture her. If that happened, she wouldn't even have a chance to escape. That would be a tragedy. Unknowingly, another 100 breaths passed. Jiku slowed down again and turned her head to look back from time to time. However, the night sky was as dark as ink, and there was no trace of Blood Prison Marshal. Strange. Why hasn't Blood Prison Marshal appeared yet? Could he not be in Yudu? Or is he cultivating in seclusion, ignoring the affairs of the outside world? So much time had passed, and with Bloodhell Marshal's speed, it would be enough for him to make 2 round trips. Jiku wasn't worried that the Bloodhell Marshal would lose him. A godly monarch expert at that level had terrifying means of tracking divine power auras. Since that was the case, there were only 2 possibilities. Blood Prison Marshal wasn't in Yudu or cultivating in seclusion. Of course, this was good news for Jiku. At the very least, the Blood Prison Marshal would not affect Ji Tianxing's plan. Thinking of this, Jiku decided to send a message to Ji Tianxing to discuss a countermeasure. But at this moment, a dazzling divine light shone in the northern night sky. 7 or 8 figures streaked across the night sky as fast as lightning as they sped over. Jiku suddenly saw hope. His originally dim eyes immediately lit up. Is it finally here? Even though she had sensed the aura of a God-King expert, she was unable to do so. But she vaguely felt that something wasn't right. Logically speaking, a powerhouse like the Bloodhell Marshal should be a lone wolf. Why would he travel together with so many helpers? Reality proved that Jiku's guess was right. She pretended to escape for a while, but her speed was too slow. Soon, she was stopped by the 8 godly monarchs. With her front, back, left, and right blocked, she could only stop in the night sky and sweep her cold gaze across everyone. What she saw were unfamiliar faces. These 8 godly monarchs were mostly dressed luxuriously and had dignified auras. It was obvious that they held high positions. Among them, there were 6 middle-level godly monarchs and only 2 high-level godly monarchs. The weakest was at the 5th level of the godly monarch realm, and the strongest was at the 8th level of the godly monarch realm. Jiku looked around, and his gaze landed on the 8th level godly monarch realm elder. This person was wearing pitch-black divine armor and a square divine crown. His tall and burly body emitted an iron-blooded, murderous aura. Jiku wondered if this person could be the Bloodhell Marshal, since he was wearing battle armor and emitting a dense, murderous aura. She wasn't like Ji Tianxing, who had refined Yuan Ji's godhead and merged with Yuan Ji's soul memories. Even if she stared at the black-armored elder, she wouldn't be able to recognize him. However, most of these 8 godly monarchs knew Yuan Ji. They surrounded Jiku and looked at him calmly as they tried to persuade him. Yuan Ji, you've been hiding for so many days. You've finally revealed yourself tonight. Yuan Ji, you can't escape even if you have wings. Stop wasting time and surrender to be judged. Yuan Ji, surrender obediently. Everyone thought that you had escaped back to the Soaring Wind region. Who would have thought that you were hiding in Yudu City until tonight? Brat, you've really made us look at you in a different light. The godly monarchs tried to persuade him. Some of them sounded regretful, some were gloating, and some were confused. However, Jiku ignored them and only stared at the black-armored elder. He was the leader of the 8 godly monarchs, and the other 7 respected him. When everyone stopped talking, the black-armored elder looked at Jiku and said regretfully, Yuan Ji, you've really disappointed me. You're the descendant of a loyal general. How could you do such a disgraceful thing? Although I've been through life and death with your father, I can't be biased in this matter. I can only follow the marshal's orders and deal with it impartially. Hearing his words, Jika was instantly filled with disappointment. Obviously, this black-armored elder wasn't the Bloodhell Marshal. Jika frowned and asked, "You are?" The black-armored elder said faintly, "I'm one of the 6 reincarnation divine generals under the command of the Bloodhell Marshal. When I fought on the battlefield with your father and killed Qin Shin in the Outer Realm, you weren't even born yet." Jika frowned again, and a cold glint flashed in his eyes. He said coldly, "So the Bloodhell Marshal stayed in Yuda's city and didn't want to show himself. So he only sent you guys?" Although the plan had failed, she still wanted to find out about the Bloodhell Marshal's whereabouts. The black-armored elder frowned and sneered. "UNG, even if you have some ability, you're still weak in our eyes. You're not worthy of the Marshal's attack. I and these godly monarchs can easily capture you. All right, don't waste time. Surrender quickly." After pausing for a moment, he added, "On account of my friendship with your father, I'll give you some advice and point you in the right direction. After I take you back, you'll take the initiative to return the divine bead and cooperate with the investigation and interrogation. You have to admit that you did this alone and don't drag your father into it. Then, get your father to make a trip to Yudu and plead with the Marshal personally. Only then will you have a chance to live." Chapter 3556. If Jiku were UNG, she would naturally thank the black-armored elder. After all, he was telling the truth, and it was the best way to lessen her punishment. However, Jiku was not UNG. Therefore, she chose to fight back. Only by doing so could she have a chance to escape. "Thank you for your kindness, but I will never surrender," Jiku shouted coldly. She waved the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Spear and charged toward the southwest. There were only 2 mid-level godly kings guarding that direction. It was a breach in the encirclement. Phoenix dances in the 9 heavens, boundless sea of fire. Jiku waved her divine spear and shot out hundreds of flaming spear shadows toward the 2 godly kings. At the same time, she released a vast amount of 5-colored divine fire, which swept toward them like a flood. The 2 god kings immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. They hurriedly took out their divine weapons and resisted with all their might. However, the black-armored elder and the other godly kings did not take her attack seriously. They all sneered contemptuously. "You're throwing an egg at a rock. UNG, you have a way out. Why are you digging your own grave? Idiot, are you tired of living? Since you don't want to surrender, we can only take you back. UNG, we have to thank you. If you don't fight back, how can we do anything?" As the godly kings spoke, they waved their divine weapons and used all kinds of divine skills to attack Jiku. The black-armored elder was too proud to attack. After all, the other 7 godly kings were enough to capture or even kill UNG. Boom, 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 boom. In the next moment, the divine skills collided with each other, creating an earth-shattering sound that spread for tens of thousands of miles. Jiku's spear shadows and divine fire were not only blocked by the godly kings, but they also dissipated. Without waiting for her to cast another spell, the divine kings used their divine abilities and ultimate skills to launch a counterattack. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 5-color divine light, ice, and fire poured down like a flood, drowning Jiku. Without a doubt, the combined attack of 7 god kings could immediately kill her. At this critical moment, she put away the Heavenly Phoenix divine spear without hesitation and gave up on UNG's divine body. With a thought, the Godhead and the Heavenly Phoenix divine spear shuttled through space, returning to the 9 heavens 10 absolutes tower several 100,000 li away. UNG's divine body was shattered by the divine light and splashed in all directions. What was even more terrifying was that the pieces of the corpses were also burned to ashes and turned into fine powder. After a long time, the divine light that filled the sky gradually disappeared, and the loud sound that reverberated between heaven and earth also gradually stopped. The 8 god kings stared at the empty night sky with complicated expressions. Why did you kill him? So dead that not even a speck of his remains remains. This brat is so arrogant, but in the end, his strength is still so weak. He can't even withstand a single blow. I didn't expect that he couldn't even withstand a single attack from us. With such little strength, how could he destroy the altar and steal the divine beads? Forget it. He's already turned into ashes. What's the point of thinking about that? At first, we just wanted to teach him a lesson and seriously injure him before taking him back for trial. I didn't expect him to die so cleanly. UNG was killed by us. What about the fortune divine beads? That's right. Our mission is to capture UNG and retrieve the fortune divine beads. Everyone, let's look for it. The God Kings discussed for a while, then suddenly remembered that the fortune divine beads hadn't appeared yet, and they suddenly panicked. Only the black-armored old man's face was gloomy, and he frowned as if he was thinking about something. A middle-aged God King came over and asked respectfully, "Divine General Chong, what are you thinking about? Do you have any idea?" The black-armored old man glanced at him and said in a low voice, "UNG could have surrendered and saved his life, but he stubbornly resisted and was killed in one move. Moreover, after he was killed, the fortune divine beads disappeared without a trace. Thinking about it carefully, he seemed to have deliberately sought death in order to hide the whereabouts of the fortune divine beads." The middle-aged God King was stunned for a moment. When he came back to his senses, he nodded in agreement and said, "That's right. After listening to your analysis, it does seem to be the case. Now that UNG is dead, the clues to the fortune divine beads are gone. Where we go to find them?" The black-armored old man frowned and looked into the distance with a deep gaze. He said in a low voice, "I have a feeling that this matter isn't that simple. UNG might just be a chess piece used to send himself to his death and to deceive others. The real culprit might be someone else. Whoever has the fortune divine beads is the mastermind behind all this." The middle-aged God King nodded in agreement again and praised sincerely. "The older the ginger, the spicier it is. As expected, you see things more clearly. Divine General Chong, what should we do next?" The black-armored old man thought for a moment and said in a low voice, "If we continue to investigate, I'm afraid it will implicate important people. Let's just report it to the marshal and ask him and the commander to make a decision." The other God Kings wanted to search for the fortune divine beads. After hearing the black-armored old man's analysis, everyone stopped searching and returned to his side. After he made his decision, everyone agreed and followed him back to Yudu City, in a courtyard near the North City Gate. Ji Tianxing was in the darkness, silently waiting for news. Suddenly, he felt the aura of the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda fluctuate. He immediately realized that Ji-Ku had abandoned Yuanji's body and returned to the interior of the pagoda. As expected, Ji-Ku's godhead returned to the 9th level of the pagoda and burrowed into her main body that had been sleeping in the sea of fire. The 9th level was filled with nirvana flames and was a boundless sea of fire. Only Ji-Ku could enter and exit at will. After her godhead returned to its original position, everything returned to normal. When Ji Tianxing saw this scene with his divine sense, he hurriedly contacted her through voice transmission. After 2 breaths, Ji corresponded. "Brother Tianxing, I was surrounded by 8 God Kings and escaped in the chaos. UNG's body should have been destroyed by them and turned into ashes. After all, those 8 guys were middle and high-level God Kings." Hearing this, Ji Tianxing frowned and asked doubtfully, 8 God Kings? Is it not Blood Prison Marshal? He didn't show up?" Ji-Ku sat cross-legged in the sea of fire and adjusted her breathing. She replied, "Blood Prison Marshal received Qian Yuan's message and knew what happened. However, he didn't show up and only sent Divine General Reincarnation and 7 God Kings. It's just capturing UNG. Those 8 God Kings are more than enough." Ji Tianxing said with some regret, "In that case, we still can't confirm the location and traces of Blood Prison Marshal." Ji-Ku was silent for a moment before saying bitterly, "But one thing is certain, Blood Prison Marshal isn't cultivating in seclusion. He can receive messages at any time. Once something more important happens, it is possible that he will appear." Ji Tianxing weighed the pros and cons for a moment before making up his mind. No matter what, tonight is the best chance for me to take action. I can't wait any longer. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 3557. Ji Tianxing's analysis was right. For the past few days, the strong practitioners of Yudu City had been attracted by the theft of the divine bead, and their attention was on this matter. They naturally didn't pay much attention to the abyss of reincarnation and the passage of two worlds. However, Yuan Ji had just been killed, and this matter would soon pass, and everyone's attention would be diverted. Once this matter passed, it would be more difficult for him to sneak into the passage of two worlds again. Furthermore, Commander Mingi would return to Yudu in another 2 days. No matter how he looked at it, tonight was the best time to head to the abyss of reincarnation. Ji Tianxing made up his mind and walked out of the darkness. He left the house and walked towards the North City Gate. At this time, it was already the 5th day of the night, and dawn was about to arrive. The North City Gate was open, and there were close to 100 city guards guarding it. There was also a Divine King Realm commander overseeing it. There weren't many people entering and exiting the city gate. Occasionally, there would be 2 or 3 people walking in groups. Ji Tianxing walked to the city gate at a moderate pace. He took out his identity token and accepted the interrogation of the city guards. Then, he was allowed to enter. From the beginning to the end, no one took a second look at him, and no one doubted him. After all, he was now Long Tian, an ordinary youth of the dragon race. This was his name in the dragon realm in his previous life. The old dragon gave him this name. After exiting the North City Gate, Ji Tianxing flew into the night sky and headed north at lightning speed. The abyss of reincarnation, to be precise, was in the northwest of Yudu City. It was hundreds of thousands of miles away. Ji Tianxing quickly crossed mountains, forests, and plains. After 15 minutes, he arrived near the abyss of reincarnation. This abyss was in the depths of the mountains, in a huge canyon surrounded by clouds and mist. It was surrounded by majestic mountains that were thousands of feet tall. The canyon was covered by gray clouds all year round. At first glance, the gray fog did indeed look like the aura of death. Near the abyss of reincarnation, Ji Tianxing became much more cautious. Seeing that there was no one around, he used his invisibility divine art and quietly passed through the gray fog, entering the canyon. In the middle of the canyon was an abyss with a radius of hundreds of miles. It was like a bottomless pit. On the ground around the abyss, 9 sacrificial altars were built. There were hundreds of guards guarding each one. The 9 sacrificial altars were operating, releasing countless strands of 5-color divine light that extended to the sky above the abyss. Billions of 5-color divine light rays condensed into a defensive light barrier that was hundreds of miles in radius, like a huge bowl that was upside down. Obviously, the entrance to the abyss of reincarnation was sealed. If he wanted to enter the abyss, he had to either break the sealing divine formation or get the token from Commander Styx and the Blood Hell Marshal. Of course, the latter was out of the question. Ji Tianxing only had one choice, and that was to break the divine array. Reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation. Reincarnation of reincarnation, reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation. However, there were 900 guards around the abyss. Reincarnation, reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation. Ji Tianxing hid in the clouds and carefully observed the situation around the abyss, thinking of a countermeasure. His first thought was to create chaos and divert the guard's attention. He would then take the opportunity to break the formation. For example, he could use the Armillary Heaven Secret technique to merge with heaven and earth and create a super earthquake. However, after careful consideration, he gave up on this idea. After all, a super earthquake could only scare ordinary people. It definitely would not scare the guards. The 900 guards were all carefully selected experts. They were basically all reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation. There were also a few reincarnation of reincarnation of reincarnation under each sacrificial altar. They should be captains. Soon, Ji Tianxing thought of using his poison divine art to silently poison all the guards. However, this was not safe, unless he could poison everyone instantly. Otherwise, someone would be poisoned first, and someone would be poisoned later. There would always be someone who could send out a signal for help. He gave up on this idea. In 15 minutes, he thought of 6 or 7 ideas. However, none of them worked or were too risky. Helpless, he could only look through his spatial ring, hoping to find a better idea. In the past few years, he had killed many divine king powerhouses and obtained countless spoils of war. Items below divine king level were basically all swallowed by him with the heaven-mending pearl. The medicinal pills, cultivation methods, and divine artifacts that could still be stored in the divine ring were basically all divine king level. His divine sense searched through the treasures piled up like a mountain. He constantly swept past those divine pills, divine artifacts, jade slips, and rare treasures. After about 100 breaths, his divine sense suddenly fixed on an ancient bronze box. He still remembered that he had obtained it from a certain region lord's spatial ring after killing him. Back then, when he was counting his spoils of war, he had opened the ancient bronze box to take a look. Inside was a simple and ancient bronze bell. From the mottled marks on the bell, it should be an ancient item. At that time, he took the bronze bell and studied it. He discovered that this item could release the soul-suppressing divine sound. It was a very obscure king-level divine artifact. Although the bronze bell was a king-level middle-grade divine artifact, its effect did not have any killing power. It was very difficult to use it. But now, it finally had a chance to use it. Ji Tianxing took out the ancient bronze box from the divine ring and took out the bronze bell mottled with copper rust. I'll call you the soul-suppressing bell for now. I hope you don't disappoint me. He held the soul-suppressing bell with both hands and muttered to himself. His eyes were filled with anticipation. Then, he formed a divine seal with his left hand and held the soul-suppressing bell with his right hand. He poured in boundless divine power and began to shake it rhythmically. The dim soul-suppressing bell immediately became lustrous with green light, as if it had come alive. Ding! 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 Clear and melodious, distant and ethereal sounds came from the soul-suppressing bell one after another. The strange thing was that the sound of the bell was very soft. Only within a 10-step radius could one hear it with their ears. But Ji Tianxing sensed that the soul-suppressing bell was emitting rings of formless ripples that spread in all directions and enveloped the entire canyon. Those formless ripples had a mysterious and powerful soul-suppressing power. Even he, a middle divine king, was slightly careless, and his divine soul was suppressed, his consciousness becoming somewhat muddled. But he immediately realized that something was wrong and aimed the soul-suppressing bell at the abyss below. Ding ding, ding ding ding. The soft bell sounds continued to sound out. The formless soul-suppressing ripples also spread out very rhythmically. Very soon, Ji Tianxing saw the effect. Under the sacrificial altars around the abyss, those 900 divine Lord Realm Guards were still standing like statues before, appearing to be in high spirits, mighty and dignified. After being enveloped by the formless soul-suppressing ripples, those guards all staggered left and right, squatting on the ground in a daze. Many guards with weak divine souls directly collapsed on the ground, falling into a deep sleep. In a short few breaths, the 900 guards virtually all collapsed. Only a dozen or so high divine Lord Realm captains were still barely holding on. Of course, their footsteps were also staggering and drowsy, unable to muster up any divine power at all. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 3558. What's going on? What happened? Why did everyone fall asleep? This wouldn't happen for no reason. There must be a problem. The guards around the abyss had all fallen into a deep sleep and were unconscious. A few of the guard captains could still stay awake. They were barely hanging on as they discussed in a panic. However, they didn't know what had happened, nor did they know how to solve the problem. Someone wanted to send a message for help, but he didn't have time to take out his communication jade slip before he fainted. Of course, Even if they took out their communication jade slip, they didn't know how to report it. Should they report to their superiors that they had been attacked? They didn't even see the enemy's shadow. Moreover, the attack had happened without warning. Just like that, a few of the guard captains held on for a while before they closed their eyes and fell to the ground. In an instant, the abyss became silent. All the guards had fallen into a deep sleep and were lying on the ground. It was a strange scene. Ji Tianxing didn't dare to waste any time. He quickly put away the requiem bell and flew near the ceiling array. He began to observe the array and find a way to break it. This was the first time he had used the requiem bell. He couldn't estimate its effects and duration. The 900 guards might be asleep for a day or two. In short, they wouldn't be asleep for too long. If it was more than a day and a night, the divine kings guarding the passage between the two worlds at the bottom of the abyss would also notice the abnormality. Ji Tianxing had to break the ceiling array in front of him within a limited time. Damn it, another supreme grade king array. After seeing the structure and veins of the array, Ji Tianxing frowned. A sinister look flashed across his eyes. Originally, a supreme grade king array was nothing. However, the ceiling array in front of him was formed by the divine power of the 9 altars. It was one of the most complicated arrays. Even a top array expert like Ji Tianxing would find it difficult to break it in a day. However, there was no turning back. Since he had already taken down 900 guards, he could only try his best to break the array. Time passed silently. Ji Tianxing stared at the ceiling array with all his attention. His eyes shone with a golden light. He could see the hundreds of millions of veins of the array clearly. His mind was also working at a terrifying speed. He tried his best to analyze the array's veins and deduce a way to break it. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. Before he knew it, 12 hours had passed. It was already dusk. The sun was on its way. Night was on its way. It was very dark in the canyon. The 900 guards were still lying under the altar, still in a comatose state. However, Ji Tianxing thanked the requiem bell's effect. Around midnight, the guards would gradually wake up. Fortunately, no one entered the canyon during the day. Just based on this point alone, the heavens were already looking out for him. Otherwise, if any random passerby saw that all of the guards had fainted, they would surely spread the news. Why is it so complicated? The structure of this divine array is perfect. I can't find a way to break it. This is definitely not the work of the Bloodhelm Marshal or Commander Styx. It must be the work of the god of the underworld. Ji Tianxing's heart was filled with anxiety as he muttered to himself. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He had never seen the god of the underworld since his rebirth, but he had already fought with the god of the underworld once and won. He had successfully stolen the creation divine pearl. This was the second time. He wasn't confident yet. Very quickly, another 4 hours passed. It was late at night. Deep in the night, thick gray clouds shrouded the Grand Canyon. The canyon was as dark as ink. Only the 9 altars flickered with a faint 5-color divine light. Ji Tianxing was still focused on observing the ceiling array. He kept changing his position to find a way to break the array. Unfortunately, he still couldn't find a way to break it. He had failed several times. The only thing that comforted him was that he finally found a weak point in the divine array. It was at the northwest edge of the abyss. He relaxed a little. He raised his sleeve to wipe the sweat on his pale cheeks. He turned his head to look at the situation around the abyss. He saw that the guards under the 9 altars were showing signs of waking up. More than a dozen guard captains were unconsciously twisting and stretching their bodies. Some of them were even groaning in pain. Based on this situation, they would wake up in at most an hour. Ji Tianxing became even more anxious. No, there's not enough time. Not to mention that he hadn't perfected the method to break the array. Even if it would be too late to use it. He would need at least 6 to 8 hours to break the array. By then, the guards would have woken up. Before he could break the divine array, the 900 guards would attack him and tear him to pieces. There was less than an hour left. What should he do? Was he going to waste all his efforts? Ji Tianxing frowned and weighed his options anxiously. At this critical moment, he became calmer and more decisive. After a few breaths, he made a risky decision. It's too late to break the divine array. In this situation, I can only aim at the weak point of the divine array and break it with brute force. With my current strength, if I use all my trump cards and go all out, there might be some hope. This is the only way. After making up his mind, he started to act. Swoosh! He flew across the dark night sky and came to the northwest edge of the abyss. He stared at the weak point of the five-colored light shield. He took out the burial of heaven and used the celestial dragon tyrant body. Swoosh! As the dazzling golden light flashed, he turned into a giant god in golden armor. His body was covered with dragon scales, and there was a dragon horn on his forehead. He looked exactly like a dragon. After the transformation, his combat strength increased by 7 times. His body surged with a violent aura that could destroy the world. He held the burial of heaven with both hands and injected endless divine power into it. He let the burial of heaven cooperate with him to erupt with the fiercest and most violent power. But this was not enough. He borrowed the power of the 5 elements world and used his trump card, the Sword of Annihilation. Open for me. When all the power was accumulated to the peak, Ji Tianqing gritted his teeth and roared. He held the burial of heaven with both hands and stabbed at the ceiling divine array under his feet. Kaboom! The next moment, the dazzling golden sword, which was thousands of feet long, stabbed the 5-colored light shield with an invincible and world-destroying momentum. When the giant sword collided with the light shield, there was a deafening explosion that reverberated in the canyon. In fact, the loud noise was so shocking that it shook the entire canyon. Violent shock waves of divine power spread out in all directions along with countless fragments of divine light. Instantly, the sleeping guard were also scattered by the shock waves, and many of them were killed or injured. Chapter 35:59. Ji Tianqing had tried his best to reduce the commotion caused by breaking the array forcefully. However, the heavens shaking, earth-shattering sound, and momentum spread out for thousands of miles, and still affected hundreds of guards. Many guards were severely injured by the divine power shockwave while they were unconscious. Their bodies were mottled with blood. Some unlucky fellows were directly killed by the shockwave, their bodies smashed into pieces. With such serious consequences, it was impossible for Ji Tianqing to hide and keep it a secret. He had expected that the divine kings guarding the bottom of the abyss would have sensed something amiss. However, there was nothing he could do about it. He only had 2 choices. Either all his previous efforts would be wasted, or he would give it his all. Fortunately, he had made the right bet and succeeded. The 1,000-foot-long sword of Armageddon accurately pierced the weak point of the divine array and brutally penetrated it. A huge hole had appeared on the 5-colored light barrier, and 5-color divine power was constantly leaking out. The entire divine array was impacted. The 9 altars connected to the abyss shook violently. Phew! It's finally broken. President Ji Tian exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, revealing a relieved expression. Looking at the hole in the 5-colored light barrier, he did not have time to be emotional or happy. He quickly returned to his original appearance and entered the abyss of reincarnation through the hole. Swoosh! After entering the abyss, he used his invisibility ability and tried his best to hide his aura as he flew down. As for the unconscious, severely injured, and guards who were gradually waking up, he could no longer care about them. He did not need to repair the hole in the 5-colored light barrier. This was because this supreme-grade divine array had the ability to heal and repair itself. The 100-foot wide hole was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. After about 30 breaths, the hole was completely healed and restored to its original state. The ceiling divine array began to operate again. Everything returned to normal. At this time, the guards around the abyss woke up one after another. The first to wake up were the dozen or so guard captains who were stronger or had secret treasures to protect them. After they woke up, they looked around in confusion and shock. They saw that hundreds of guards were still unconscious, and many of them were severely injured. The surrounding mountains were cracked, and countless rocks had collapsed. They were confused and puzzled. What happened? What just happened? It seems like there are fewer guards. Why are there bloodstains and corpses on the ground? Could it be that an expert attacked us and killed many guards while we were unconscious? That's not right. We were all in a comatose state and had no power to resist. If someone killed the guards, they would have killed all of us. But from the looks of it, it's clear that a huge battle has taken place here. Even the mountains have collapsed. Who can tell me what's going on? Stop guessing. Quickly send a message to the immortal general. The dozen or so guard captains discussed for a while, but did not have any clue. They could only take out their communication jade slips and report the situation to the God King experts at the bottom of the abyss. A full quarter of an hour passed. Ji Tianxing had dived 20,000 miles into the abyss, but he still hadn't reached the bottom. He didn't encounter any obstacles during the 20,000 miles of flight. It was just that the abyss was filled with gray fog, the temperature was bone-chilling, and the surrounding rock walls were covered with icicles. But when he dived down 20,000 miles, he started to encounter obstacles. In the deep abyss with a radius of 100 miles, there were tens of thousands of sabers, spears, swords, and halberds, as well as densely packed netherworld purple fire and balls of soul devouring blue fire. Those sabers, spears, swords, and halberds were all low-grade, king-grade divine artifacts. There were a total of 20,000 of them. Those netherworld purple fire and soul-devouring blue fire were all fist-sized balls. There were as many as 30,000 of them. These two things mixed and intertwined, forming a divine array, like a layer of dangerous barrier. If ordinary divine kings came here, they would definitely be frightened by this lineup. Without the strength of a high-grade God King, they would also be unable to pass through the blockade of sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and divine fires. Once they fell into the array, they would be surrounded and attacked endlessly until they were blasted into pieces. Ji Tianxing stopped in midair and used the God's Eye mystic technique to observe carefully for a moment before continuing to dive. Even though this strange ceiling formation looked extremely sinister and terrifying, it was still extremely terrifying. In reality, its complexity and profoundness were not as profound as the ceiling array at the entrance of the abyss. Ji Tianxing only observed for 15 minutes before he figured out the structure of the divine array and found a way to pass through it. Therefore, he remained invisible and carefully entered the fire array of the Kenshin swords, shuttling through it cleverly. He successfully avoided countless sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and divine fires. He dived for 3,000 miles and didn't encounter any sabers, swords, or divine fires. He didn't trigger any attacks from the divine array. He saw that if he continued to dive for another 2,000 miles, he would be able to pass through the fire array of the Kenshin swords. At this moment, the thing he didn't want to see the most happened. At the bottom of the abyss, there were 5 rays of divine light flying up from below, approaching in extremely fast speed. Judging from the energy waves of the 5 rays of divine light, they were all God King experts. Obviously, they were the God Kings guarding the passage between the 2 worlds at the bottom of the abyss. They had received the message from the guard captains on the surface and were about to rush to the surface to check the situation. Most importantly, in a few breaths' time, they would meet Ji Tianxing. Although Ji Tianxing's concealment divine ability was very brilliant, and his aura was concealed very well. Among the 5 rays of divine light speeding over, there were 4 middle-level God Kings and 1 high-level God King. Yet, there was only one correct path to this fire array of the Kenshin swords. If he took a wrong step, he would trigger the divine array and be attacked by sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and divine fires. Those 5 God Kings guarding this place naturally knew the correct path. Therefore, if Ji Tianxing didn't avoid them, he would definitely meet them head-on. Both sides would brush past each other in the space of 2 feet. If those 5 God Kings were a little more cautious and attentive, it was very likely that they would discover him. For a moment, Ji Tianxing's heart was in his mouth again. What to do? How to hide his tracks and not be discovered by those 5 God Kings. Moreover, he had to stay on the correct path and not trigger the fire ray of the Kenshin swords. At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing was abnormally calm and instantly came up with an idea. Burial of Heaven, it's time to test you. He used divine telekinesis voice transmission to give buried heaven a few instructions. Burial of heaven immediately understood his intentions. In the next instant, Ji Tianxing took out burial of heaven and let it stop in midair. He hid in the world inside the sword and quietly observed the situation outside. At first glance, there was no change in the fire array of the Kenshin swords. Burial of heaven was mixed in with countless sabers, spears, swords, halberds, and didn't feel out of place and didn't attract any attention. However, there was still a tiny flaw. This space of 2 feet was the correct path to pass through. There were no sabers, swords, or divine fires originally. Now, there was an additional pitch-black divine sword. If a god king was attentive enough and understood the fire array of the Kenshin swords well enough, they might discover the abnormality. Chapter 3560. Even though this method had a flaw, the chances of being discovered were not high. Those 5 godly kings anxiously went to the surface to check the situation, looking like they were on fire. They might not notice that a black divine sword appeared in the blade Kenshin fire array. In comparison, Ji Tianxing stayed where he was, brushing past the 5 godly kings. The risk of being exposed was greater. Therefore, Ji Tianxing could only take a gamble. It took a long time to describe, but actually this also happened in the blink of an eye. 2 breaths later, those 5 godly kings entered the blade Kenshin fire array and started traversing the correct path. They seemed to enter and exit frequently and were very familiar with the path. Their speed was very fast. Of course, the 5 godly kings entered in a single file. No one walked side by side. Swoosh, 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 only to see 5 beams of divine light flicker continuously. Those 5 godly kings approached rapidly. In a short 6 breaths, they traversed 2,000 miles and arrived in front of the sword of burial of heaven. At this time, Ji Tianxing's heart also leaped to his throat. The critical moment had arrived. Whether or not he could hide from these 5 godly kings, success or failure depended on this one move. Swoosh! The first godly king in the lead arrived in front of the sword of burial of heaven. This person was a middle-aged divine race member with grizzled temples. He wore the star ink cloud divine armor. His face was resolute and cold, and his entire body was suffused with cold, killing intent. Furthermore, this person was also the strongest among the 5 godly kings, reaching the 8th level godly king realm. His expression was dark, and his eyes revealed a look of anxiety and anger. He was currently thinking about something in his mind. Towards the sword of burial of heaven beside him, he did not even have the interest to take a second look. He brushed past the sword of burial of heaven. Immediately after, the second godly king also arrived in front of the sword of burial of heaven. This was a guy whose looks and strength were more average. He only had 5th level godly king realm strength. He followed the leader expressionlessly, looking like he was not worried about anything and was only loyal to orders. Without a doubt, he also did not notice the sword of burial of heaven and brushed past it. Next, the 3rd and 4th godly kings also passed through in succession. They were also ordinary mid-level divine kings. They were only in a hurry to rush to the surface through the blade Kenshin fire formation to check out the situation. As for the sword of burial of heaven, they ignored it just like the other 2. At this time, Ji Tianxing's hanging heart had already settled back into his stomach. However, he did not expect that the 5th divine king would stop when he passed by the sword of the burial of heaven. This was a god king with a thin figure, and even a bit of a protruding mouth and monkey-like cheeks. His eyes were bright as he looked around. There was a strong sense of craftiness in his eyes. After stopping, he turned his head to look at the sword of burial of heaven that was close at hand and frowned in confusion. He vaguely felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what was wrong, so he frowned and pondered. The 4 god kings in front had already flown 100 kilometers upwards. Noticing that the 5th god king didn't follow, one of them hurriedly shouted, "Skinny monkey, what are you standing there for? Why aren't you following?" The god king, nicknamed Skinny Monkey, pointed at the sword of burial of heaven and said to that person, "I seem to remember that this position is empty. It hasn't changed for several decades. Why is there a black sword suddenly? That god king sneered disapprovingly and said, "Shut up. Isn't it just a sudden incident at the entrance that disturbed your cultivation? No matter how unwilling you are, you still have to follow orders. Don't find excuses. Hurry up and carry out the mission. Can't you see that divine General Tianzhan is in a bad mood?" After saying that, that god king even pointed at the leading god king. Very clearly, that god king wearing the star ink cloud divine armor was divine General Tianzhan. Skinny Monkey pursed his lips and said in annoyance, "I have always been obedient and follow orders. How can I not carry out the mission? I'm serious. Don't you remember the situation on this path?" That god king rolled his eyes and said helplessly, "You can't even handle the matters of cultivation. Why are you still remembering these useless things?" Anyway, this divine array was set up by the Grand Marshal. Who knows, he might have taken the time to perfect it or change the position of the sword. All right, I won't wait for you. Take your time to study it. When Lord Divine General is angry and wants to punish you, you could go cry. After saying that, that god king hurriedly followed the team and ignored Skinny Monkey. Skinny Monkey looked at the sword of burial of heaven and couldn't help but scratch his head. He muttered softly, "Am I being paranoid?" After saying that, he hurriedly followed the others and left quickly. After the 5 god kings left the sword of Kenshin's fire array and flew tens of thousands of miles upwards, Ji Tianxing finally heaved a sigh of relief. Just now, when Skinny Monkey stared at the sword of burial of heaven and asked his companions, Ji Tianxing was rather nervous and worried. Fortunately, Skinny Monkey wasn't too sure. The other god kings also didn't pay attention to such trivial matters. This allowed Ji Tianxing to muddle through and successfully avoid a calamity. Swoosh! He left the sword world, put away the sword of burial of heaven, and continued to fly in stealth. With the experience just now, he became even more cautious. Moreover, his speed of shuttling through the sword of Kenshin's fire array was relatively slow. As he moved forward, he had to calculate the correct path and consider the next step. Now, there was no need for that. The 5 god kings had already demonstrated the correct path. He just had to follow it. After a few short breaths, he walked out of the sword of Kenshin's fire array. He continued to descend. There was no obstruction for a full 10,000 miles. Finally, Ji Tianxing reached the bottom of the abyss when he dived to a depth of 30,000 miles. In front of him was a boundless sea of magma. All he could see was slow-moving magma. In the endless crimson magma, he could occasionally see a few black spots. Those were reef islands. These reef islands were often made of special materials that could withstand the terrifying heat and magma corrosion. Ji Tianxing stood on a small reef hill and looked at the sea of magma in front of him. He muttered in his heart, "Like 1,000 years have passed, but this place hasn't changed at all." Of course, he remembered that this sea of magma was hundreds of thousands of miles wide and contained countless metals and mineral resources. In the middle of the sea of magma, there was a reef island with a radius of 10,000 miles. The entrance of the passage between the two worlds was on that reef island. There was no need to guess. There must be a large number of troops stationed on that reef island. There were also top powerhouses guarding it. Just now, the 5 god kings went to the surface to investigate the situation. Now, there should be much fewer guards on that island. I have to hurry and enter the passage between the two worlds before they rush back. With that in mind, Ji Tianxing maintained his stealth state and silently flew into the sky, heading straight ahead. Originally, there were a small number of powerful divine beasts and a large number of fire spirits in the sea of magma. Back then, when Ji Tianxing came here, he killed 2 divine beasts and refined hundreds of fire spirits. But now, the sea of magma was very calm. There were no signs of divine beasts or fire spirits, and he couldn't detect their auras either. However, in the depths of the sea of magma, there were many divine lord powerhouses mining and excavating mineral veins. Ji Tianxing thought that after the god of the underworld took control of this place, he must have sent powerhouses to eliminate the divine beasts and fire spirits in order to seize the resources in the sea of magma. Wonderful book house. Chapter 3561. There is nothing wrong with the god of the underworld's actions. The entire Reincarnation Island had become his territory. It was normal for him to plunder cultivation resources within his territory. However, there were too many people under the god of the underworld who specialized in excavating cultivation resources. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed like they were in a frenzy to accumulate large amounts of resources. This made Ji Tianxing a little wary. He secretly wondered what the god of the underworld and the Azura god emperor were up to. Could it be that after surpassing the divine king realm, the amount of resources required for daily cultivation was so shocking? Or perhaps the god of the underworld and the Azura god emperor were carrying out some secret mission and urgently needed large amounts of cultivation resources. Ji Tianxing's intuition told him that he was more inclined to the latter. Before he knew it, 15 minutes had passed. Ji Tianxing crossed hundreds of thousands of miles of lava sea and arrived at the reef island in the middle of the lava sea. He stood in the sky and looked down at the reef island, secretly observing the situation of the defenses. The reef island was too big. It had a radius of 10,000 miles. On the surface, the outer ring of the reef island was empty. There were only black and red reefs, which were rugged and protruded in different patterns. But in reality, the entire reef island was covered by an invisible defensive formation. Ji Tianxing secretly probed and knew that it was another supreme king-level formation. And it was as complicated as the one at the entrance to the abyss of reincarnation. To enter the reef island, one had to crack or open the formation. The central region of the reef island had a radius of 100 miles where the garrison was stationed. The terrain there was relatively flat and the ground was relatively level. There were a dozen palaces there. In the center was a spacious plaza, and the palaces surrounded the plaza. There was a formation in the square that looked like a huge altar. It was 10,000 feet tall. 8 huge stone pillars stood in 8 different directions around the altar. The stone pillars were engraved with runes of divine formations, as well as many strange diagrams. Ji Tianxing knew that the altar-like formation was the entrance to the passage between the two worlds. As long as one injected divine power, a space-time tunnel would appear above the altar. Once they stepped into the space-time tunnel, they could leave the God realm and enter the Dragon realm. It sounded simple, and Ji Tianxing was very close to the space-time tunnel. But in fact, he hadn't even figured out how to enter the reef island. Not only did they have to break the defensive formation of the reef island, but they also had to avoid attracting the attention of the island's defenders. In addition, even if he successfully entered the reef island, how to open the altar without alerting the garrison was a big problem. The closer you are to success, the calmer you have to be. You can't be anxious. This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind, and he reminded himself to calm down and think of a solution. He hated himself for not being strong enough. He could only use his wits to do anything on the Reincarnation Island. He had to use all kinds of tricks. If he had already broken through to High Divine King, then it would be too easy. There was no need to go through so much trouble at all. As long as the god of the underworld did not appear, he would be unstoppable on the Reincarnation Island. However, he could only think about it. In the end, he had to face reality. Soon, half an hour had passed. Ji Tianxing had been invisible all this time, secretly observing the defensive divine array of the reef island. After such a long period of observation, he roughly understood the structure of the formation, as well as the strength of its defensive power. Without a doubt, this defensive formation was the work of the god of the underworld. Among the 5-peaked divine kings, the god of the underworld was the best at setting up formations. Fortunately, his formation Dao attainments are still a little lacking compared to mine. If I recover to my peak state, I can definitely break this formation in 4 to 6 hours. This thought flashed through his mind. Ji Tianxing continued to observe the formation, sorting out its structure, looking for flaws, and deducing a way to break it. Although this would definitely take a long time, he was already here. However, since he was already here, he could only be patient and proceed step by step. Just as he was concentrating on observing the formation, he suddenly sensed the auras of several divine kings rapidly approaching from the sky behind him. He immediately put up his guard and stopped observing the formation. For safety's sake, he did not use divine sense to investigate those few divine kings' auras. Instead, he turned around and looked over. Before long, he saw 4 streaks of divine light speeding over from the sky above the magma sea 10,000 miles away. The figures in those 4 streaks of divine light, as well as their divine power auras, Ji Tianxing was not unfamiliar with them. He recognized them at a glance. Those were precisely the 4 middle-level divine kings who went to the surface to investigate the abnormal situation previously. As for the heavenly war divine general in the lead, he did not appear. He might have stayed on the surface. Ji Tianxing furrowed his brows. Looking at those 4 middle-level divine kings, he thought to himself, they came back so quickly. Calculating the time, they only stayed on the surface for 7 to 8 minutes, right? Looking at their hurried appearance, could it be that they are carrying out some mission? It was too bad that those 4 middle-level divine kings only cared about hurrying along and did not open their mouths to talk. Very soon, they flew to the sky above the reef island and rushed straight to the center of the reef island. They stopped in the sky above the plaza. One of them kneaded divine seals with both hands, continuously firing out over 100 streaks of divine power of different attributes, pouring it into the defensive divine formation under their feet. Clearly, this person was currently activating the entrance of the defensive divine formation. At this moment, Ji Tianxing stared fixedly at that divine king's casting action, looking at it especially carefully. However, in a blink of an eye, that divine king finished casting the spell. In the originally empty sky, a streak of white light suddenly appeared, rapidly spreading to both sides, forming a light gate that was over 10 feet tall. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Those 4 divine kings did not hesitate at all, passing through the light gate one after another, returning to the garrison. Before long, their figures vanished inside a certain palace. But at this time, Ji Tianxing mused for a moment. The corners of his mouth curled up into a hint of a ruminating smile. Truly sending a pillow when I was dozing off. Previously, I was still worried that you all came back early. I didn't expect that this major problem in front of me was resolved by you all. Without a doubt, that divine king's method of opening the space gate was clearly seen by Ji Tianxing. Previously, in the Fortune Divine Palace, the high priest had also opened the space gate in front of him once, and he had learned it word by word. At that time, the high priest had been inexplicably shocked and had called him a freak. And to Ji Tianxing, this was merely a normal operation. His talent of stealing others' knowledge was so heaven-defying. He did not waste any more time, flying to the northernmost part of the reef island, hiding under a small reef hill. Those divine kings could cast their spells in the sky above the plaza to open the spatial gate, but Ji Tianxing could not do so. He could only hide in a secluded corner and secretly cast a spell to open the spatial gate to avoid being discovered. After observing his surroundings for a while and making sure there was nothing out of the ordinary, he began to cast a spell. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. He formed a divine seal with both hands, continuously sending out over 100 streaks of different attributes of God Force into the defensive divine formation in front of him. Instantly, a streak of white light appeared under the small reef hill, rapidly expanding into a space gate. Chapter 3562. It's done. Ji Tianxing stopped and looked at the space door in front of him with a satisfied smile. After confirming that there was no one around and that he hadn't alerted the guards on the island, he stepped in. Swoosh! He passed through the space door and entered the defensive divine formation. The door of light immediately disappeared. Once he entered the divine formation, he felt much more comfortable. At least, the interior of the divine formation wasn't as hot as the outside, making it hard to breathe. The temperature here was more normal, and the air was filled with divine power. He maintained his invisible state and tried his best to restrain his aura as he carefully made his way to the center of the island. While he was moving forward, he was silently calculating in his heart. According to the information I gathered in Yudu and UNG's memories, there aren't many guards on this island. There were only 2 Samsara divine generals, 20 divine king experts, and 200 divine Lord Realm guard stationed here all year round. After all, the passage between the 2 worlds isn't usually opened, and no one enters or exits here. The guard station here are actually very free and have nothing to do. Most of the time, they are cultivating in seclusion. Those upper divine Lord Realm guards, no matter how many there were, Ji Tianxing did not take them to heart either. Although the 2 divine generals of Samsara and 20 divine kings could pose a threat to him, he wasn't afraid. What he was really afraid of was the blood prison marshal whose whereabouts were unknown. That guy was the same as Commander Mingyi, a 9th-level divine king. To Ji Tianxing, if he faced either of them, he could only be beaten up or run away. He had no chance of winning. He tried his best, but he could only keep his life. I hope the blood prison marshal isn't here and is obediently staying in Yuda City. Ji Tianxing prayed silently. 15 minutes later, he finally reached the center of the island and arrived at the guards' encampment. There were palaces made of black stone all around. Not far ahead was the plaza and the sacrificial altar of time and space. Ji Tianxing didn't rashly enter the encampment. He first circled around the periphery and observed the situation silently. In the end, the 12 palaces were quiet. There were the auras of guards and divine kings inside, but no one was moving. That plaza was also silent. There were 20 upper divine lord guards guarding the north and south ends of the plaza, motionless like statues. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that although they were standing upright, their eyes were closed, and they were all silently cultivating. These guys are really hardworking. Even when they're on duty, they don't waste any time. From the looks of it, they really have too much free time. Ji Tianxing muttered in his heart. He slowly stepped into the garrison's encampment and silently approached the square. His method of concealing his aura was very brilliant. When he stepped onto the square and walked towards the altar in the middle, the guards at the north and south ends of the square did not notice him at all. He quietly came to the bottom of the altar and looked at the 8 stone pillars around the altar. He carefully observed the divine patterns and diagrams on the pillars. If an ordinary person saw this scene, they would most likely think that the 8 huge stone pillars were just for decoration. But in reality, these 8 stone pillars were the key to opening the altar. The effects and functions of the altar, as well as the method to open it, were all hidden in the divine patterns and diagrams on the stone pillars. Only by finding the correct solution among the billions of patterns and diagrams could the altar be opened and the space-time passage opened. This was undoubtedly another great test for Ji Tianxing. At the very least, it would take him 3 to 5 days. At the very least, it was very likely that it would take him 1 to 2 months. Of course, there was another possibility. Even if he spent 3 to 5 months, he might not be able to deduce the method to open the altar. After all, this altar and the 8 stone pillars were the handiwork of the god of the underworld. 1,000 years ago, when Kenshin came here from the Dragon Realm, this place was not like this. At that time, there was no altar, no plaza, no 8 stone pillars, and no surrounding palaces. This was a barren island, and in the middle of the island, there was a gate made of huge stones. There was a whirlpool of white light in the gate. That was the space-time passage. Back then, several ancient clans of the Reincarnation Island took turns guarding the stone gate. Gods and dragons who wanted to travel between the 2 realms only needed to obtain the permission of the gatekeeper and pay a high fee. But now, the space-time passage was hidden and sealed with a divine array. Ji Tianxing wanted to know why the god of the underworld did this. Why did he seal the space-time passage and cut off the 2 realms? Time passed silently. The reef island was hidden deep in a magma sea. The sun and moon could not be seen, and it was difficult to tell whether it was day or night. This place was always the same color. The sky was dyed dark red by the light of the fire. An entire day passed. Ji Tianxing was still focused on observing the stone pillars, staring at the dense array patterns and diagrams. Occasionally, he would walk around and observe different stone pillars from different angles. However, he still could not understand how the divine array operated. let alone find a way to open it. During this time, the 20 guards guarding the two ends of the plaza did not notice anything unusual. They were like stone statues, standing in place and cultivating with their eyes closed. In the evening, two god kings had walked around the palace in the northwest. They seemed to be discussing something, but they did not even look at the plaza, nor did they notice anything unusual. This made Ji Tianxing feel much more at ease. He had not been exposed even now, which meant that the guard station here were all ordinary god kings. At the very least, the blood prison marshal was definitely not here. To him, this was the best news. As the days passed, the garrison was as calm as ever. Ji Tianxing had also observed for a few days. He had memorized the formation patterns and patterns on the 8 stone pillars without missing a single detail. He finally did not have to walk back and forth to observe the stone pillars. He sat beneath the altar with his eyes closed in contemplation, and he repeatedly deduced and calculated in his mind. 5 days later, he finally made some progress and found a way to open the divine array. 8 days later, after thousands of deductions and predictions, he analyzed the way to open the divine array and found a breakthrough. Unfortunately, he could not cast a spell to try to open the divine array. If he did, he would definitely be able to quickly verify whether it was right or wrong and find the correct way to open the array. As a result, he could only repeatedly deduce and predict in his mind and choose 2 different methods. Unknowingly, half a month passed. Ji Tianxing was immersed in his deductions and calculations, forgetting the passage of time. The garrison did not change much. It was still quiet. During this time, Divine General Heaven War, who had gone to the Abyss entrance to investigate, returned to the garrison alone. Clearly, he had not been able to find the reason and result, so he returned gloomily. After returning to the garrison and entering the Eastern Palace, he did not come out again. Chapter 3563. In this half a month, many things happened in Yudu. Yuan-Ji was annihilated, and the creation divine bead was nowhere to be found. Commander Mingyi personally investigated the Fonling region master and swore to find the creation divine bead. Yuan Ba retaliated angrily and broke off relations with Commander Mingyi. He even threatened to kill Divine General Chang to avenge his son. In short, although Yuan-Ji was dead, the theft of the divine bead didn't subside. Instead, it became more and more serious. Undercurrents surged inside and outside Yudu. The subjects under the god emperor schemed against each other, causing Yudu to be in a foul atmosphere. However, the initiator of all this chaos, Ji Tianxing, was completely unaware of it. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Anyway, none of the strong practitioners under the god of the underworld were good people to him. Back in the battle in the outer realm, most of the divine kings followed the god of the underworld to kill him. To be honest, many of his guards and followers were killed by these people. Therefore, the more chaotic Yudu and Reincarnation Island were, the happier he was. If the strong practitioners of Yudu had internal strife and fought to destroy Yudu, he would rejoice in their misfortune even more. Today was the 20th day since Ji Tianxing snuck into the Reef Island to observe the sacrificial altar's divine formation. It was a special day worthy of celebration, because he had successfully deduced the correct opening method, although he hadn't tried and tested it yet. In his mind, he had already simulated and deduced thousands of times, modifying and perfecting it countless times. Even if the opening method he deduced was slightly different from the god of the underworld's method. But that was only a simple and cumbersome difference. They were essentially the same. After deducing the result, Ji Tianxing heaved a sigh of relief. In these 20 days, his mind had been working to the limit, using his wisdom and mind to the extreme. No matter how strong his body and soul were, he couldn't take it anymore. His mind was very tired. This wasn't a battle, but it was more tiring than a battle. Therefore, he stayed in the plaza and silently circulated his energy to recover his spirit. He had to conserve his energy and wait until he was at his peak before breaking the divine formation. This was because he knew that he would definitely alarm the guarding god kings once he tried to break through the formation. At that time, Not only would he have to crack the divine formation, he would also have to fend off the encirclement of those god kings. That would be another extremely dangerous battle. 2 days later, Ji Tianxing had recovered more than half of his spirit and strength. At this moment, White Dragon and Ji Ke's voices suddenly rang in his mind. Master, did you go to the space-time passageway? Have you returned to the Dragon Realm? Big Brother Tianxing, is your operation going well? Are you in danger now? The two of them were the happiest about returning to the Dragon Realm, and were looking forward to it the most. This was because the White Dragon and Ji Ke had followed him into the Dragon Realm and cultivated there for over 100 years. At that time, he was Kenshin Ryushin, a super genius whose name shook the Dragon Realm. As his proud disciple, the White Dragon was also highly respected in the Dragon Realm, and was doing very well. However, the White Dragon had a perverse personality and did many ridiculous things in the Dragon Realm. The evaluation of the White Dragon in the Dragon Realm could be said to be half praise and half blame. Ji Ke's days in the Dragon Realm with him were the happiest, most relaxed, and most carefree memories of her life. Later, she followed Ryushin into the God Realm and spent her time constantly on the move, traveling, and fighting. Although there were times when she was happy, it was far from being as happy as when she was in the Dragon Realm. Ever since Ji Ke recovered her memories of her past life, she had been looking forward to returning to the Dragon Realm and revisiting the scene of her old home. Ji Tianxing understood the White Dragon and Ji Ke's thoughts. I'm currently at the entrance of the space-time passageway. The god of the underworld has set up a sealing formation here and sent a large number of god kings and guards. It took me 20 days to deduce the method to break the formation, and I'm ready to break it. Don't worry, I'll inform you as soon as I return to the Dragon Realm. Ji Tianxing replied to the White Dragon, and Ji Ke through telepathy and told them to relax. The White Dragon was filled with excitement and exultation as he praised his master. Ji Ke, however, became even more worried and hurriedly warned him through telepathy. Big Brother Tianxing, you're in a dangerous place right now. If you try to break the formation, you'll definitely be discovered by the guards and surrounded. I'll wake up Big Senior Sister, Yank, and Chao Ching you right now, and we'll work together to fend off the enemy. Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and agreed. That's good too. When the time comes, I'll have to focus on breaking the formation and won't be able to divert my attention to fend off those god kings. All right, if you hadn't reminded me, I would have forgotten about that person. Ji Ke was clearly stunned and asked, Who? Ji Tianxing chuckled and said, By phone. He's been locked in the Divine Pagoda for so long. He must be bored to death. I have to go and see him. Ji Ke was silent for a moment and guessed his intention. He replied, Yes, so much time has passed. It's time to talk to him. If he can help you, I believe your chances of success will be higher. Ji Tianxing did not delay any longer and hurriedly left the plaza and flew to the edge of the reef island. He then hid under a small reef mountain at the northern edge and secretly took out the Jiuqian 10 Absolutes Pagoda. Swoosh! The Jiuqian 10 Absolutes Pagoda turned into a speck of black dust and hid among the reef rocks. He then entered the third level of the Jiuqian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and appeared in the cold wasteland. This space was very vast, but it was dark and cold. Ji Tianxing's divine sense spread out and quickly found by foam. He was sitting cross-legged on a huge rock thousands of miles away and cultivating. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing flew across the sky and stood in front of Bai Feng, calmly sizing him up. Originally, to a high-level god king like Bai Feng, a few months was just the blink of an eye. However, Ji Tianxing realized that God King Bai Feng had obviously aged a lot. He looked tired and frustrated. It was very obvious that Bai Feng's feelings in these few months must have been very complicated. Before Ji Tianxing could say anything, Bai Feng sensed his aura and opened her eyes of her own accord. You actually still remember me and know to come and see me? Bai Feng frowned and glared at him coldly. He asked in an unfriendly tone, Tianxing, you imprisoned me here and did not ask about me for a few months. What is the meaning of this? Ji Tianxing smiled and said, You misunderstood. This is not imprisonment. I just want you to stay in an absolutely quiet environment to calm down and think about some things. Bai Feng narrowed his eyes and sneered. There's nothing to think about. I will definitely not follow you, nor will I betray His Majesty the God Emperor. Furthermore, you can't kill me. The Phoenix clan will avenge me. Ji Tianxing shook his head and said meaningfully, I have left the boundless heaven continent long ago and am no longer within the Azura God Emperor's sphere of influence. Also, before I left the boundless heaven continent, the Phoenix clan leader and elders once talked to me about you. Bai Feng's pupils constricted and his expression changed drastically. After being stunned for a long time, he asked in a deep voice, What do you mean? Ji Tianxing smiled and said, I promised the Divine Phoenix clan leader to spare your life, but you have been requisitioned. From now on, you are my guard. Chapter 3564. Bai Feng was silent for a long time. He did not doubt Ji Tianxing's words. The Divine Phoenix clan leader and elders did not ask Ji Tianxing to let him go. This was also within his expectations. Although he kept saying that if Ji Tianxing killed him, the Phoenixes would definitely take revenge for him, but he was wrong. However, in reality, he was not confident. He was a typical pro-thearch. He was loyal to the Azura God Emperor and had obtained power from him. The Patriarch and elders of the Phoenixes, on the other hand, were conservative and stubborn. They were immersed in their past glory and could not extricate themselves. On the surface, they submitted to the Azura God Emperor, but in reality, they were not convinced. They always dreamed that one day, the various ancient clans could unite and overthrow the Azura God Emperor and restore the ancient clan's supreme status. However, the various ancient clans were not strong enough. They did not have the courage to fight the Azura God Emperor. Kenshin's return undoubtedly gave the Phoenix clan and the various ancient clans hope. Bai Feng understood this and was not surprised by the situation. He remained silent, which meant that he had tacitly agreed to follow Ji Tianxing and be his guard. However, he did not say anything. Ji Tianxing waited for a while before saying, I'll take your silence as a yes. As long as you perform well, you may be able to obtain my trust and reward. Stay here for the time being and wait for my orders. After saying that, Ji Tianxing left the third level. Bai Feng frowned and looked at the pitch-black night sky. He revealed a self-mocking smile. I'm a region lord, a high-level god king. How can I be this guy's guard? And I have to perform well to obtain his trust and reward? Ha! Who does he think he is? The Azura God Emperor? Bai Feng sneered disdainfully. After falling silent, he revealed a sorrowful expression. No matter how disdainful he was and how unwilling he was, he had to submit to reality. He was a smart person. He knew that if he resisted Ji Tianxing now, he would not have a good ending. He could only accept his fate. Ji Tianxing appeared at the foot of the small reef mountain and put away the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda. As usual, he surveyed his surroundings. Seeing that there was nothing out of the ordinary, he quietly returned to the garrison. With the experience of the past half a month, he was now much more relaxed and was no longer as vigilant as before. Returning to the square, he secretly investigated the situation in the various palaces. 1 building, 2 buildings, 3 buildings. In each palace, there were 20 guards and 2 Divine King Realm experts. Those people were all staying in their rooms and secret chambers. Most of them were cultivating. Without a doubt, now is the best time to make a move. Ji Tianxing stared at the altar in front of him and calculated in his mind, if nothing unexpected happens, I should be able to break this divine formation in 15 minutes. If something unexpected were to happen, the time taken would be doubled. At that time, the guards in the various palaces will definitely come out in full force to besiege me. Yank, Chao Qingyu, and Bai Feng only need to hold on for about 15 minutes before I can successfully open the space-time passageway. He calculated that the chances of success were not small. There should be a 50% chance. Thus, he began to act. Swoosh! He first took out the soul-suppressing bell and channeled his divine power into it. Then, he gently shook it a few times. Ding, 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 a faint crisp sound could be heard. Instantly, formless ripples spread across the square. That was formless, soul-suppressing divine power. It quickly spread to a radius of 50 kilometers and enveloped the garrison. Although he shook the bell very lightly, and the sound of the bell was also very soft, the soul-suppressing divine power was greatly weakened. He did this so as not to alarm the divine kings in the various palaces. However, the effects of the soul-suppressing divine power were still immediate. The 20 guards guarding the north and south ends of the square had the power of a high-level divine lord. However, they were corroded by the soul-suppressing divine power and became drowsy. Their consciousness was blurry, and they could no longer be as mighty and dignified as before. They began to sway and stagger. Ji Tianxing continued to shake the soul-suppressing bell a few more times. Ring after ring of soul-suppressing divine power spread out. Those 20 guards fell to the ground and fell unconscious very quickly. He then used his divine sense to investigate the situation of the various palaces and discovered that the guards in those palaces had also fallen unconscious. While those divine king experts were only slightly affected, their consciousness was a little groggy. Not a single person fell asleep. Just like this, Ji Tianxing easily finished off 200 divine Lord Realm guards. These guards fell into a deep sleep and needed at least 6 to 10 hours before they could wake up. Following this, those that could pose a threat to Ji Tianxing were only the 2 divine General Samsura and the 20 divine king experts. There were already several divine kings who detected the abnormality. He did not dare to delay any longer. He hurriedly put away the soul-suppressing bell and started casting spells to crack the array. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. His hands formed a divine seal as his eyes focused on the 8 stone pillars. He continuously fired out 5-color divine light, injecting it into the tall sacrificial altar. As dozens of divine lights entered, the originally calm sacrificial altar immediately lit up with dazzling 5-color divine light. The 8 stone pillars around the sacrificial altar were previously a dull brown color without a trace of light. Now, the 8 stone pillars also lit up with formation runes one after another. This proved that Ji Tianxing's deduction was correct. The 8 stone pillars were indeed the key to cracking the divine array. According to the reaction of the 8 stone pillars, he could also verify the correctness of his cracking method. As he continuously fired out divine light, injecting it into the sacrificial altar, more and more array patterns and patterns lit up on the 8 stone pillars. At this moment, several divine kings in the 10 palaces around the plaza had already discovered the abnormality. Previously, they were cultivating and were affected by the invisible, soul-suppressing divine power. They were unable to calm down. They were puzzled as they searched for the source of the soul-suppressing divine power. At this moment, their divine senses detected that the sacrificial altar and stone pillars in the plaza had lit up with divine light for no reason. A few divine kings immediately felt alarmed. They hurriedly ended their cultivation and rushed out of the secret chambers and rooms. Something's happening. Who is activating the space-time sacrificial altar? Who is on duty this month? Why is this happening? Quickly investigate the reason. Don't just stand there. Let's go to the plaza and take a look. A moment later, the 6 divine kings flew into the sky and gathered together. They were anxious and confused as they discussed. After a few words, they reached a consensus and came to the sky above the plaza. They looked down at the plaza from above. The first thing they saw was the space-time sacrificial altar and the 8 stone pillars. They all lit up with dazzling divine light and emitted powerful ripples of divine power. Next, they saw the 20 guards at the north and south ends of the plaza. They were all unconscious on the ground. In the center of the plaza, there was clearly no one under the space-time sacrificial altar. However, countless divine lights were constantly emitted and injected into the sacrificial altar. Seeing such a strange sight, the 6 god kings were filled with shock, their eyes wide open. What's going on? It's too strange. Why are those guards unconscious? Could it be that they were attacked? Everyone, look under the sacrificial altar. Is someone hiding there and casting a spell? Chapter 3565. Although Ji Tianxing was still in an invisible state and restrained his divine soul aura, but he was casting spells to break the formation, constantly shooting out beams of five-colored divine light. This exposed his existence and position. Of course, this was within his expectations. Those god kings were not fools. Even if they were caught off guard and unprepared, they would at most be stunned for 2 to 3 breaths before they realized something was amiss. At that time, even if he was in an invisible state, he would be surrounded and attacked. As expected, the gazes of the 6 god kings all gathered below the sacrificial altar. Everyone was stunned for a moment and immediately guessed the truth. I know. There's a god king expert casting spells while invisible to open the space-time altar. Yes, it must be that bastard who attacked the guards in the square. Casting spells to open the space-time altar so brazenly and casting spells to become invisible. Isn't he just deceiving himself? This is really an eye-opener for me. There's actually someone so daring to sneak into this place to open the space-time altar? Huh? Ever since we were ordered to guard the space-time altar, we've been bored for hundreds of years. Today, we finally have some fun. Discovering that someone had sneaked in and cast spells to open the space-time altar while invisible, the God Kings were not angry or panicked. Instead, they were very excited and agitated. After a few words of discussion, the 6 God Kings attacked at the same time, casting all kinds of spells towards Ji Tianxing below the space-time altar. How dare you? Show yourself. Come out, bastard. What's the use of being invisible? Prepare to die. The God Kings shouted coldly and released a sky full of sharp blades of divine light, shooting like a rain of arrows. Ji Tianxing obviously did not want to be interrupted. He exploded with all his divine power and used a secret technique to form a divine shield. Instantly, an oval-shaped shield more than 10 feet tall formed, enveloping him and protecting him firmly. Bam! Bam, bam, bam. In the next moment, the divine light blades and pillars of ice and fire hit the golden shield fiercely, creating a series of loud sounds. The solid golden shield shook violently from the impact, but it was not damaged. Only a few cracks appeared. Even Ji Tianxing, who was casting a spell to break the array, was shaken to the point that his body trembled, and he frowned with a gloomy expression. I've underestimated these fellows. Looks like I'll have to put in more effort. He had no choice but to release his divine power to repair the cracks in the golden light shield and greatly strengthen its defense. The 6 God Kings originally thought that with their combined attacks, that invisible God King expert would definitely be heavily injured. At the very least, he would be forced to reveal his true form. However, to everyone's surprise, the God King did not appear. Instead, there was only a barrier of divine light that blocked their attacks. Everyone was shocked, and their eyes were filled with disbelief. Still not showing yourself? You even managed to block our attacks? That guy's a little strong. That's right. That fellow's strength isn't strong enough. How could he sneak in here and even dare to activate the altar? 6 of us middle-level God Kings working together were unable to force him to show himself. That means he's definitely a high-level God King. Why don't we inform the 2 divine generals and let them handle it? The 6 God Kings discussed in whispers. Someone suggested reporting to the 2 divine generals. However, the other God Kings immediately rejected the idea. We haven't even seen that fellow's true form, and we don't understand the situation. Are we going to report to the 2 divine generals? This is just a probing move. We haven't even used our full strength. If we report to the divine generals now, wouldn't it make us look useless? At that time, the divine generals will definitely be unhappy and will scold us for being trash. The commotion caused by us working together to cast spells is so big. Everyone will hear it. The 2 divine generals will definitely know too. Do we still need you to report it? Hearing the few God Kings rebuttal, the God King who made the suggestion immediately looked embarrassed and did not say anything else. Without hesitation, everyone worked together to cast their ultimate skills and attack Ji Tianxing. That was just a probe. They did not take their opponent seriously. But now, the 6 God Kings realized that their opponent was very strong. They all used their trump cards and ultimate skills and exploded with their strongest strength. Rising Dragon Slash, Moon Reflection Divine Blade, Water Mirror Divine Sword, 7 ultimate slashes of the Divine Seal, 6 paths of blood transformation Divine Light. Following the angry roars, the sky above the plaza lit up with dazzling divine light. It formed a sky-covering sword and saber light that slashed toward Ji Tianxing. At this moment, the entire Reef Island was illuminated by the divine light. A violent divine power that could destroy heaven and earth suppressed the entire plaza. Ji Tianxing did not dare to be careless. As he continued to cast spells to activate the altar, he increased the power of the golden light shield again. Boom, 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 boom. The sky full of saber light and sword light slashed the golden light shield with ear-splitting power. A deafening explosion sounded. Instantly, the golden light shield trembled violently from the bombardment. Cracking sounds could be heard as it shattered. Dense cracks appeared on the shield, and its defensive power was greatly weakened. The sky full of saber light and sword light collided with the golden light shield. A violent shockwave erupted, and thousands of fragments of divine light burst forth. Rumble. The shockwave carried the fragments of divine light and spread in all directions like a rainbow flood. It hit the palaces around the plaza. Instantly, the entire Reef Island started to shake. The ground of the plaza was blasted into pieces. Many gullies and holes were formed. The 10 palaces in the surroundings also shook violently and lit up with colorful defensive shields. Fortunately, those palaces were protected by divine arrays. That was how they were preserved. Otherwise, they would have been destroyed by the shockwave and turned into ruins. Although the plaza was blasted into pieces and looked like a scene of devastation, the space-time altar and the 8 dark brown stone pillars in the middle of the plaza were intact. After all, that was a supreme-grade, king-level divine array. Even a high-level godly king could not destroy it. Damn it, he blocked it again? This is really strange. How strong is that guy? He still hasn't shown himself. Looks like we can't threaten him anymore. The 6 godly kings were dumbfounded when they saw that the golden light shield had returned to its original state and that the invisible expert had yet to show himself. Forget about the first probing attack. Just now, they had attacked with all their might. In the end, they still could not hurt the other party. They could not even force the other party to show himself. This was too ironic. The 6 godly kings' expressions were somewhat ugly. Their eyes were rather gloomy. At this moment, more than a dozen godly kings flew out from the palaces around the plaza and arrived above the plaza. These godly kings were originally cultivating in the palaces. The commotion caused by the battle in the plaza was too great. They had no choice but to end their cultivation and rush over to check the situation. In the end, the plaza was devastated like a ruin. But there were only 6 godly kings in the sky. There was no trace of the enemy. The godly kings were filled with doubts. They all opened their mouths to question. Who dares to invade the space-time altar? What are the few of you doing? Why did you cause such a huge commotion? A strong enemy invaded? Where is he? Chapter 35:66. The questioning of their companions caused the 6 god kings' faces to heat up. They were so ashamed that they wanted to crawl into a hole. Fortunately, the godly kings did not question them or mock them. Everyone's attention was immediately attracted by the golden light shield below the altar. They saw with their own eyes that there was no one below the altar, but there was a golden light shield that constantly emitted 5-color divine light and poured into the space-time altar. The altar lit up with dazzling divine light, and dense array patterns appeared on the 8 stone pillars. Such a strange scene left the dozen or so god kings rather stunned. But they immediately guessed the reason, and they all revealed angry and mocking expressions, killing intent bursting out of their bodies. Ha! Unbelievable. Someone can actually sneak in here and secretly crack the space-time altar? I've learned something new. This king wants to see which powerhouse is so confident. This is not confidence. This is seeking death. All right, the one who is invisible, Our 20 guard commanders are all here. You should also show yourself, right? You only have this one chance. Don't wait for us to attack. If we attack, you don't need to show yourself. You'll be reduced to ashes directly. The godly kings stood in the air above the plaza, staring at the golden light shield below the altar. They were all full of confidence and mocking sneers. They had guarded the space-time altar for hundreds of years and had never encountered such a thing. Before today, they had never thought that there would be such a crazy and daring person who could do such a thing. Therefore, their current feelings were more surprised and excited than angry. However, no matter how the godly kings mocked and ridiculed, Ji Tianxing ignored them. He still remained invisible, casting spells with all his might to crack the space-time altar. Everyone mocked and ridiculed him to help him stall for time. He hoped that they would not attack and continue to mock and ridicule him. But unfortunately, this idea was unrealistic. The godly kings mocked a few times, and seeing that Ji Tianxing did not appear, they could not help but attack. Kid, we gave you a chance, but you didn't cherish it. No matter who you are, what status and background you have, you're dead today. You're finished. No one in this world can save you. Die! Following a series of cold shouts, the dozen or so god kings all used their divine abilities and supreme skills as they worked together to attack Ji Tianxing. Since the square had been reduced to ruins, they had nothing to worry about. Anyway, the time and space altar and the surrounding palaces were protected by supreme grade and superior grade king level divine formations. They were not afraid of being damaged. As for the damaged plaza, they would be able to repair it very quickly. Swoosh! Swish, swish, swish. In the next moment, the sky above the square was filled with the light of divine spells. All kinds of ice blades, frost swords, wind, fire, and lightning poured down like a torrential flood. Ji Tianxing, who was in the middle of casting spells to break the formation, felt an immense pressure and could only stop casting spells to break the formation. Celestial Dragon Tyrant Body. He had no choice but to use his trump card, turning into a giant golden-armored god that was hundreds of meters tall. His combat ability was instantly increased by 7 times. However, this was still not enough. It was completely unable to withstand the combined attacks of 14 god kings. He then opened the Zhouqian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and summoned Chao Qingyu, Lan Er, Yank, Ji Ku, Yin Yao, Bai Feng, and the others. Swish, swish, swish. In the blink of an eye, the 6 of them appeared around him and were exposed to the eyes of the god kings. The god kings were all stunned for a moment. Their expressions were filled with shock and astonishment. Have they finally appeared? There are actually so many of them? There are actually 6 god kings? How did they pass through the entrance of the deep abyss and sneak in here? That's not right. The strength of these 6 god kings is not that strong. 3 low-level god kings, 2 mid-level god kings, and 1 high-level god king. Can they withstand our combined attacks? Similar thoughts appeared in the minds of all the god kings. At the same time, Ji Tianxing and his 6 companions waved their divine weapons and unleashed their ultimate skills with all their might to defend against the onslaught of divine spells. Bam! 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 Boom! Rumble! One side attacked with all their might, while the other defended with all their might. The divine spells unleashed by both sides clashed fiercely in the air above the square, creating a loud explosion that shook the universe. The earth-shattering collision and explosion reverberated in the air above the reef island and did not dissipate for a long time. An incomparably violent shockwave, carrying billions of fragments of godly light, spread out in all directions and engulfed the entire reef island. Instantly, the reef island shook violently, causing the surrounding sea of lava to create huge waves that were hundreds of meters tall. The ground around the square caved in, revealing crisscrossing ravines. The defensive divine arrays of the 10 palaces were also shattered by the impact, creating cracking sounds. 2 of the palaces were blasted into ruins on the spot, collapsing into a small mountain. The 40 guards who were still unconscious in the palaces died, unluckily. After a while, the earth-shattering explosion and the dazzling divine power light dissipated by a lot. The 20 God King Realm Guard commanders were dumbfounded when they saw the situation below the space-time altar. The 6 God Kings who were slightly weak in their eyes actually blocked their combined attacks. None of the 6 God Kings died. They were all safe and sound. Even the golden light shield did not shatter. The God King who was hiding behind the shield was still casting spells, constantly injecting divine light into the space-time altar. At this moment, half of the runes and diagrams on the 8 stone pillars were lit up. This meant that the activation of the space-time altar was halfway done. If they continued to stall for time, when all the runes and diagrams on the stone pillars were lit up, the space-time altar would activate. This was not an outcome that the 20 Guard commanders wanted to see. They did not need to communicate with each other through telepathy, but they had a tacit understanding. They all roared and shouted angrily. "How dare you? Die! We can't let them activate the space-time altar. Stop them. The God Emperor has decreed that anyone who activates the space-time altar without permission will be killed without mercy. Everyone, let's attack together. We can't let them succeed." Then, the 20 Guard commanders attacked furiously, attacking Ji Tianxing and the others with all their might. Sky-piercing divine sword, sky-burning sun palm, 10,000 gods greet, supremacy of the 9 heavens. Among the 20 Guard commanders, only 4 of them were 7th-stage realm high-level God Kings. The other 16 were intermediate God Kings. However, they had the advantage in numbers. When they joined forces to display their trump cards, the power was extremely terrifying. In a split second, colorful sword shadows, divine flames, and bloody light blasted towards Ji Tianxing and the others. Below the space-time altar, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others had an unprecedentedly solemn expression. The pressure on them was extremely great. Just now, they were able to block the opponent's attack because there were only 10 over God Kings. Now it was different. With 20 God Kings attacking at the same time, the power was even more terrifying. At this moment, Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others had the idea of protecting Ji Tianxing even if they would be seriously injured. They decided to launch a counterattack. Chapter 3567. Ji Tianxing and his companions only added up to 7 people. Whether or not they could withstand the joint attack of 20 God Kings, no one was confident in their hearts. They might be able to block it, or they might not be able to block it. Both of them would suffer heavy injuries. It was even possible that he would be killed on the spot. In order to survive and to protect Ji Tianxing, everyone unleashed their full potential without holding back, using their strongest killing moves. In the next moment, the overwhelming attacks of divine spells collided violently in the sky, creating a deafening explosion. Rumble, bang, 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 bang. Deafening noises rang out incessantly as countless divine blades were shattered into countless fragments. The destructive shockwave spread out in all directions, engulfing the entire reef island. In an instant, the defensive divine formations of 2 more palaces were destroyed. The palaces collapsed into ruins, leaving only broken walls behind. Of course, the unconscious guards in the 2 palaces had also turned into ashes. The reef island trembled violently, and the surrounding magma ocean surged with thousands of feet-high waves. Such a terrifying force caused the weaker God Kings in the sky to stagger back as their faces paled. All of them suffered internal injuries from a shock. Some of them were bleeding from their noses and mouths as they groaned in pain. Below the space-time altar, the situation of Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others was obvious. Not only were the 2 of them injured, but Chao Qingyu, Lan Er, and Yank were also severely injured. Other than Bai Feng and Ji Tianxing, all 5 of them had pained expressions on their faces. Their internal organs had all been damaged, and blood was constantly flowing out from the corners of their mouths. After suffering such heavy injuries, everyone's strength had weakened a lot. Even though they managed to fend off the encirclement of 20 God Kings, their faces were extremely stern. They were filled with worry and anxiety. Just 20 guard commanders were enough to severely injure them. If the two Samsara divine generals attacked, how could they stop them? At that time, someone would definitely die on the spot, right? Ji Tianxing also had the same idea, but he had no time to talk. He could only use all his strength to break the array. The sooner he opened the space-time altar, the sooner everyone could escape from danger. Swish! Swish! Ji Tianxing's spellcasting speed was even faster than before. His hands left afterimages in their wake as he continuously shot out multicolored divine light into the space-time altar. 70% of the runes and diagrams on the 8 stone pillars had been lit up. Success was not far away. At this time, the 20 guard commanders woke up from their astonishment and shock, and they all exclaimed in disbelief. A mere 6 or 7 god kings actually managed to block our combined attacks. Unbelievable! That guy who is invisible is definitely a well-known figure among high divine kings. Although they're all heavily injured, none of them are dead. It's unbelievable. Everyone, don't be discouraged. They were only able to resist once and were already heavily injured. If we attack a few more times, they will all be dead. Don't just stand there. Let's get rid of them before the 2 divine generals attack. Yes, if the 20 of us can't kill them, how can we face the divine general? The many god kings discussed for a while before joining forces to attack again. Dozens of earth-shattering divine powers with dazzling divine light came crashing down and enveloped Ji Tianxing and company. The attack this time was as powerful as the previous one. However, Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and company were all heavily injured and weakened. It was very difficult for them to block the attacks of 20 god kings. Either their injuries worsened or their divine bodies were destroyed. Moreover, Ji Tianxing's spellcasting speed would definitely be affected. Everyone was well aware of this point. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing decisively stopped casting spells to block the attacks and used all his strength to block them. While it was important for him to cast spells to break the arrays, everyone's safety was more important to him. Great protection art! He shouted angrily and used the armillary heaven mystic technique to absorb the divine power of heaven and earth within a radius of 50,000 miles. In an instant, the boundless divine power of heaven and earth condensed into a crimson shield that was 1,000 feet wide and enveloped everyone within. Most of the land within 50,000 miles was a sea of lava. In this world, the most abundant divine power was fire elemental and metal elemental divine power. Therefore, this solidified shield with a hint of gold within the crimson shield was extremely powerful. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and company did not counterattack. Everyone channeled their divine power into the crimson shield to increase its defensive power. Boom, 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 boom. In the next instant, the 20 god kings cast dozens of divine powers and bombarded the crimson shield one after another. Loud noises that shook the universe spread for tens of thousands of miles. A scene that all the god kings found inconceivable appeared. The crimson shield that was 1,000 feet wide was indestructible. Even though it was bombarded with earth-shattering attacks, it was still intact. It only shook violently and flashed with crimson flames. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and company within the shield were unharmed. However, the attacks of the god kings collapsed one after another. A terrifying shockwave spread across 30,000 miles. Crack, crack, boom, boom. The reef island finally fell apart amidst the violent shaking. More than a dozen wide ravines were blasted open. The plaza was completely reduced to ruins. All the surrounding palaces were reduced to ruins. Only bricks and rubble were left. The 20 god kings were also swept away by the shockwave. They were sent flying backward and landed a few hundred miles away. Many of them were still in midair. They were already vomiting blood and screaming in pain. When they landed, they smashed into the ruined ground. They were all in a sorry state with disheveled hair and bloodstains all over their bodies. This result left the 20 godly monarchs stunned. Everyone was inexplicably shocked. Their eyes were wide open, and their expressions were filled with horror. Oh my God, what happened just now? It's that invisible God King. It's definitely him. It's too terrifying. That person's shield actually blocked our attacks and even injured us. That guy is definitely one of the best among the high-ranking God Kings. He might be even stronger than the Lord Divine General. It's over. With that flame shield around, I'm afraid we can't do anything to him. The 20 God Kings were all in a sorry state, their expressions dejected. Although they said it tactfully, everyone knew in their hearts that the invisible God King was definitely stronger than the 2 divine generals. After all, it was impossible for Tianjin and the 7 Evils divine generals to block their joint attacks. Now that things had come to this, the 20 God Kings' thoughts quietly changed. Earlier, they did not want to let the 2 divine generals take action. Otherwise, it would appear that they were too incompetent. But now, they were all anxiously waiting for the 2 divine generals to take action. After all, the battle earlier had already destroyed the garrison's base and even blasted the Reef Island into pieces. If they continued to be entangled, the Reef Island would probably fall silent. Such serious consequences were not what they could bear. Chapter 3568. Why aren't the divine generals back yet? Something's not right. We can't stop that guy. If the 2 divine generals don't do anything, the space-time tunnel will be opened. Quickly send a message to the 2 divine generals and ask them to kill the enemy. Now that things have come to this, we can't care about our pride anymore. Quickly send a message for help. Oh, right. Are the 2 divine generals not at their base? When did they leave? We're doomed. They didn't leave earlier or later, but they chose to leave now. Everyone, don't just stand there. After sending the message, let's join forces to attack and put pressure on those bastards. We can't let them open the altar. Yes, even if we can't break that shield, we can at least hold that guy back. The Divine Kings discussed for a while before flying back to the space-time altar. Everyone spread out and stood around the space-time altar surrounding the pure gold shield. Within the shield, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others were channeling their divine power to support the pure gold shield. Ji Tianxing took advantage of this rare opportunity to cast a spell to open the altar. Soon, the 20 divine kings surrounded them and were about to attack again. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others looked solemn, and their hearts were in their mouths. At this moment, in the sky above the sea of lava tens of thousands of miles away, a cold, majestic voice suddenly shouted, "How dare you behave so atrociously in front of me? You're courting death." This was a deep and heavy voice of an elder. It contained a strong, murderous aura, and it was domineering and majestic. Suddenly hearing this cold shout, the 20 divine kings stopped casting their arts and turned their heads to look at the source of the shout. In the sky 30,000 miles away, there was a ball of crimson divine light that was as red as blood, and it was speeding towards them like an aurora. In just a few breaths' time, the ball of crimson light crossed 30,000 miles and arrived above the Reef Island. At this moment, the 20 divine kings finally saw the figure in the crimson light. In the crimson light, there were 3 divine kings. The leader was a burly elder who was more than 10 feet tall, with broad shoulders. This person was as sturdy as an iron tower. He wore blood-red battle armor and had a dark purple cape draped over his shoulders. His white hair draped behind his head and danced in the wind. His square face looked old and resolute. It was obvious that he had been through a lot. A pair of bell-sized eyes, as deep as the starry sky. The 20 god kings were stunned when they saw the white-haired old man in blood-red armor. They all became overjoyed and excited. "Yes, Marshal. We didn't report to the Marshal. Why is he here? Oh my God, the Marshal actually came in person. Ha! With the Grand Marshal personally here, those fellows are dead for sure. The 2 immortal generals are back too. I understand. No wonder the 2 divine generals aren't on the island. They went to invite the Grand Marshal." Without a doubt, the white-haired old man in blood-red armor was the famous Blood Prison Marshal. This person was already a 9th-stage realm god, king, 1,000 years ago. Back then, he followed the god of the underworld and fought everywhere. He besieged Kenshin's subordinates in the starry sky and made great contributions in battle. This person's character and aura was just like his name. Anyone who came into contact with him would feel a killing aura, like a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Those who were slightly weaker would be intimidated until they trembled in fear. And the two divine kings following behind the Blood Prison Marshal were Tian and the 7 Carnage divine generals. The two divine generals were both at LV8 divine king realm. If they were placed in any continent of the god realm, they would be top-notch experts who could dominate a region. But at this moment, they could only follow behind the Blood Prison Marshal respectfully. Swoosh! In a blink of an eye, the crimson light arrived above the space-time altar. The crimson light dissipated and the Blood Prison Marshal and the two divine generals appeared. Seeing them arrive, the 20 god kings all revealed expressions of relief as they hurriedly bowed and paid their respects. Subordinate pays respect to the Grand Marshal. Greetings to the two divine generals. Everyone bowed in unison and shouted in unison. The Grand Marshal only glanced at them before retracting his gaze and looking at the crimson gold shield expressionlessly. The two divine generals couldn't help but frown when they saw the miserable state the god kings were in. What's wrong with you? You can't even defend the base? The 10 palaces have been razed to the ground, and the 200 guards are all dead? Not only is the base destroyed, the entire island is in pieces and was almost drowned by the sea of lava. You good-for-nothings usually use up a lot of cultivation resources, but you're so useless at a critical moment. The two divine generals reprimanded the 20 god kings in a stern tone and looked furious. The 20 god kings lowered their heads and looked like they were accepting their punishment. No one dared to defend themselves. Of course, they knew in their hearts that the two divine generals were doing this for their own good. The Blood Prison Marshal came and saw the miserable state of the Reef Island with his own eyes. He was obviously furious. If the two divine craftsmen didn't reprimand them, they would be in trouble when the Blood Prison Marshal reprimanded them. As expected, without waiting for the two divine generals to finish, the Blood Prison Marshal raised his hand and interrupted them. There's no need to reprimand these guard commanders. It's not that they're useless, but that the opponent is too strong. The opponent in front of them isn't someone they can deal with. Hearing the Blood Prison Marshal's words, the 20 god kings let out a sigh of relief. Divine General Tian quickly bowed and thanked the Marshal for his forgiveness on behalf of the god kings. The 7 fiend divine generals changed the topic and stared at the crimson gold shield below the altar. He asked, Grand Marshal, the 6 fellows in the shield, other than the High God King who is barely passable, the others are all weak characters. The opponent you speak of, the Blood Prison Marshal stared at the crimson gold shield and locked onto Ji Tianxing with his aura. He sneered, the real opponent is that guy who is casting invisibility and trying to open the space-time altar. With so many of us here, he can't escape even if he has wings. He's dead for sure. But look, he still hasn't shown himself and is still casting his technique in an orderly manner. How could an ordinary person have such willpower and confidence? The two divine generals shook their heads. The Blood Prison Marshal said meaningfully, back then, the two of you and I followed His Majesty the God Emperor and participated in the battle in the Outer Realms. All of us saw with our own eyes that person turn to dust and fell in the void. But do you believe it? That person who died 1,000 years ago actually came back to life. Tian and the 7 fiends raised their eyebrows, their eyes shining brightly as they revealed expressions of disbelief. Grand Marshal, you're talking about that #1 expert of the human race? Is it really him? The Grand Marshal sneered. Whether it's him or not, we'll know once Bun Shui attacks. As his voice fell, he suddenly raised his right hand and punched at the crimson gold shield below the altar. Sky-breaking fist. As the Grand Marshal roared, a crimson fist as large as a mountain fiercely punched out. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 3569. Although Marshal Bloodhell's punch didn't look flashy, it was a very simple punch. There was no dazzling light or shadow, and the fist beam wasn't exaggerated either. However, a godly monarch at his level had long reached the realm of returning to simplicity. His control of divine power had also reached a near-perfect state. When ordinary godly monarchs cast spells, divine light would fill the sky. In fact, it wasn't very powerful, and much of the divine power would be scattered. However, Martial Bloodhell's punch had condensed divine power to the extreme. The mountain-sized fist beam was like a real blood-colored gem. Its power was extremely terrifying. It was enough to break through the spatial barrier and punch into the outer realm. At this moment, before the blood-colored fist beam arrived, the crimson gold shield was already shaking violently and cracking. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others were under great pressure. Their bodies became bent. Without a doubt, the crimson gold shield couldn't withstand this punch and would shatter on the spot. Everyone in the shield would also be killed by this punch. At the moment of life and death, Ji Tianxing could only give up on casting spells. He held the Burial of Heaven with both hands and counterattacked with all his might. Sword of Annihilation. He roared angrily and drew the power of the five-element world. He slashed out the 1,000-foot-long golden sword with all his might. Boom! Crack! The 1,000-foot-long golden sword struck the blood-colored fist beam, producing a loud explosion that shook heaven and earth. Amidst the loud, shattering sound, the golden sword collapsed on the spot. Thousands of golden fragments burst out, creating a terrifying shockwave. The blood-colored fist beam was intact, but its speed was several times slower and its power was reduced by more than half. Bam! In the next moment, the fist radiance, which had been weakened and dimmed, hit the crimson gold shield. With a muffled sound, the crimson gold shield and the blood-colored fist beam collapsed at the same time, turning into a torrent of divine light that covered the sky and dissipated between heaven and earth. Clearly, Ji Tianxing had to go all out to block Martial Bloodhell's casual attack. Although he had resolved Martial Bloodhell's heaven-breaking fist, the crimson gold shield had collapsed. His face was pale from the shock, and his aura was chaotic. He could no longer maintain his invisible state. Swoosh! As the light flickered, he appeared. Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others quickly surrounded him and looked at him with concern. At the same time, the Blood Prison Marshal, the 2 divine generals, and the 20 god kings all looked at him. They studied him with mixed feelings. This is the guy who blocked our joint attack. The Grand Marshal is still the strongest, breaking his shield with a casual punch and forcing him to reveal his true form. Strange, this fellow is over 300 meters tall, covered in dragon scales, and has a dragon horn on his forehead. He's a dragon? No wonder he risked his life to open the space-time altar. He definitely wants to escape back to the dragon realm. That's not right. Didn't the Grand Marshal just say that guy is the strongest human? Stop guessing blindly. Let's see what the Grand Marshal has to say. With the Blood Prison Marshal and the 2 divine generals present, the 20 divine kings were very relaxed. They had completely become spectators. In any case, they were not strong enough. Even if they joined forces to attack, it would be useless. They might as well be spectators. It's really you. The Blood Prison Marshal stared at Ji Tianxing. After a moment of careful observation, he suddenly revealed a mocking sneer. Kenshin Long Tian. Even if you use a secret technique to transform into a dragon, you can't change the aura of your divine soul. You still can't escape my detection. Within the golden shield, Ji Tianxing stood like a mountain and looked at the Blood Prison Marshal expressionlessly. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Chao Qingyu, and the others all stared at the Blood Prison Marshal with hostility. They were very anxious and worried. Only Bai Feng's expression was the most complicated. He was so anxious that he was about to curse. Mother of Asterisker. This guy is the Blood Prison Marshal of the Reincarnation Island? We're actually on the Reincarnation Island. Kenshin, this lunatic, wants to open the space-time channel to go to the Dragon Realm. Now that the Blood Prison Marshal and so many divine kings have surrounded us, we're all dead. At this moment, Bai Feng was very regretful. If he had known this would happen, he would have rather died than submit when he was on the Boundless Heaven continent. This way, even if Kenshin killed him, he would at least have a quick death. Today, falling into the hands of the Blood Prison Marshal was worse than death. Although Bai Feng was the ruler of the Boundless Heaven continent, he had also heard of the fierce names of Commander Styx and the Blood Prison Marshal. He knew that these two guys were the right-hand men of the god of the underworld, the famous Grim Reaper and Grim Reaper. However, he had never thought that he would meet them one day, and under such circumstances. What should I do? Bai Feng was burning with anxiety and was at a loss. At this moment, Ji Tianqing stared at the Blood Prison Marshal and asked, "You should be in Yuta City. How did you get here in time?" Also, Tianzhan and the 7 demons. I clearly saw them in the palace of the encampment. In the past half a month, everything went smoothly according to Ji Tianqing's plan. He calculated the time accurately. As long as he opened the space-time altar within 45 minutes, he would be able to smoothly head to the Dragon Realm. Even if someone reported the news to the Blood Prison Marshal, he would not be able to stop it in time. And before he opened the space-time altar, he only needed to deal with 20 God Kings and 2 God Generals. But now, the situation was completely different from what he had expected. Hearing his question, the Blood Prison Marshal and the 2 God Generals sneered mockingly. Bloodhelm Marshal revealed a confident smile and said calmly, "You're right. Before this, I've been cultivating in seclusion in Yuta City. Now that the world is peaceful and there are no wars, I am rarely free. All the internal and external affairs and political affairs are handled by that old man Styx. However, the chaos you created in Yuta City made me smell a conspiracy and danger. If I'm not wrong, Yuan Ji's theft of the Creation Divine Pearl was done by you, right?" Ji Tianqing did not deny it. He frowned and asked, "How do you know?" The Blood Prison Marshal smiled even more confidently and explained, "Everyone in Yudu City knows that Yuan Ji is a good-for-nothing who just broke through to the God King realm. With his little strength, how could he destroy the altar and steal the Creation Divine Pearl? Therefore, when I found out about this, I suspected that some expert had taken over Yuan Ji's body. That night, Yuan Ji escaped to the south of the city and was seen through by the city guard's governor. I sent God General Chang and a few commanders to the south of the city to kill Yuan Ji. In the end, Yuan Ji was killed on the spot, and the Creation Divine Pearl disappeared without a trace. From that moment on, I was very sure that Yuan Ji had been taken over by an expert. Speaking of which, Old Man Styx was really muddle-headed to make Yuan Ba a scapegoat." Ji Tianqing frowned and said, "This matter is considered well-planned, but not flawless. It can fool ordinary people, but it can't fool you. But how can you be sure that I did it?"